Chapter 107. Low-level magic couldn't hurt high-level mysterious beings. It was just like how a person would be fine if they were drenched in water, but it would be terrible if they were hit by a stone. Duque was very clear about his limits. He didn't know if Khadgar, who was a mage apprentice, had encountered Tristan Ilhoof in the game's history. He only knew that if he didn't use some skills, he would be completely useless in a battle of this level. Just like the priest just now. After the battle with the Orc Warlock, Duque had already figured out one thing. For the sparse arcane energy of low-level mages, powerful mages who used magic often had very good resistance. They didn't even need to do anything, and the highly concentrated magic in their bodies would automatically disperse the magic attacks of low-level mages. Physical damage was different. Unless it was a boss with a huge body, such as a giant dragon or a large demon, very few were not afraid of physical damage. Kilric was definitely a big guy to other inferior demons, but in front of humans, it was only the size of a 2-year-old baby, just above Lothar's knees. As a support-type demon, Kilric's strength was in magic attacks, not defense. In the end, it was hit. Arcane Impact, a classic arcane spell. Every time Arcane Impact was cast, the damage caused by all arcane spells would increase by 15 to 978%, and the mana consumption of Arcane Impact would also increase by 200%. This effect could be stacked up to a maximum of many times, or it would disappear after casting any damage spell other than Arcane Impact. When Duque first came into contact with this spell after his transmigration, he didn't feel anything, because once this spell was stacked up, it would consume a lot of mana, which was extremely disadvantageous for a protracted battle. But when Duque was stuck at the threshold of a sky mage, he looked at this spell again, and it was like he had found a treasure. As a special mage with Arcane Fire Circuit, Duque didn't have to worry about the lack of mana among those of the same level, but he was extremely lacking in high attack power. The vast amount of mana gave Duque the capital to play around. In the eyes of others, stacking Arcane Impact 3 times was already unbearable, and any more would be the rhythm of draining one's mana pool. So in most spellbooks, there was such a note: maximum of 4 stacks. This logic did not apply to Duque. Duque's spellcasting was almost separate. He would allocate enough mana and let the system elf control the magic missile, while Duque himself had been secretly stacking Arcane Impact. When Kilric appeared, what awaited him was a 7-layered Arcane Impact. Just the power of this spell was enough to drain a genuine level 9 Earth Mage dry. Duque. TSK. Drizzle. After being compressed, and compressed again, the Arcana technique's density had already surpassed that of an incorporeal body, appearing in front of everyone's eyes. If someone were to stab it with a sword, the sword would most likely be broken. Duque was able to take advantage of this powerful Arcana technique attack. It was too much of a waste to just use an arcane technique. Therefore, what Siahe, Lothar, and Garona saw was that after the little demon was hit by a dazzling purplish-blue Arcana technique attack, the terrifying Arcana technique did not dissipate. Instead, the dissipating energy condensed again, under the control of Duque's mental strength. A huge Arcana technique palm, that was as tall as a human, appeared. Like a huge palm, it slammed onto Kilric's head with the force of a mountain. Bam! It was a tremor that shook the entire huge room. The helper that Siahe had painstakingly recruited was instantly killed by Duque's 2 consecutive attacks. Looking at Kilric, who had turned from a little demon to a demon paste, and then disintegrated into illusory evil energy and dissipated, Lothar actually had the leisure to stick out his tongue. At first, Lothar and Garona did not know why Duque would use such a powerful attack on an inconspicuous little demon. After a blink of an eye, they understood. This huge satyr, that was not to be trifled with, was showing a state of weakness that they had never seen before. His speed, strength, mental strength, and reflexes had all dropped significantly. Lothar could even feel from the feeling of the long sword stabbing into Siahe's body that the defense of Siahe's skin and muscles had plummeted. Good job, Duque. Lothar whistled happily. After easily blocking Siahe's machete with his shield, Lothar suddenly slashed his sword across Siahe's neck. The sword that carried some kind of divine power cut through a quarter of Siahe's neck like a piece of white paper. The cut was so big that even the naked eye could see it clearly. Purple blood spurted out in large mouthfuls, like ketchup being sold cheaply. If Siahe was a human, this attack would have been enough to kill him. The body of a demon could never be measured by human standards. Perhaps realizing the power of the sword in Lothar's hand, Siahe actually endured more attacks on other parts of his body and covered his wound with his left claw to reduce blood loss. Seeing that victory was in sight, Lothar and Garona both stepped up their attacks. At this moment, even Duque joined the siege of Siahe. Lothar and Garona were very unfamiliar with the cooperation with mages. They could tell each other's position with the naked eye, so they simply separated and attacked Siahe without affecting each other. Mages. Even Lothar had never worked with mages, not to mention Garona, who was rarely seen by mages. Didn't they say that there was a Mediv? Come on, when the Mediv really took action, Lothar wouldn't have anything to do. The other pharaoh were mostly arrogant, and you could only see the nostrils of the pharaoh, let alone talk about cooperation. For a moment Lothar shuddered. He didn't know how to cooperate with Duque. It must be noted that this was also the first time that he and Garona had truly worked together. He was the distraction, and Garona was the main attacker. Plus Duque? Magic didn't have eyes. A few seconds later Lothar, however, was relieved. Duque was so impressive that he didn't look like a newbie who had been exposed to magic for less than a year. Not to mention earth mages. It was likely that most sky mages wouldn't be able to use magic at the same level as Duque. Lothar was the distraction from the front, and Garona was the backstab, but Duque couldn't keep up with Garona's wild movements. It could be said that there was almost no gap on the entire ground for Duque to attack. In Lothar's opinion, the only way to find him was to pass by him in a heartbeat. Unexpectedly, Duque played a bomb. Chapter 108. A huge purplish-blue energy ball floated less than 2 meters above Evil Hoof's head. Duque didn't attack casually. Once Evil Hoof attacked Lothar, a powerful arcane impact would hit Evil Hoof's head the moment Lothar raised his shield. Usually, Duque would ask the lesser demons to stack the arcane impact appropriately. Basically, the number of arcane impact layers was maintained at around 5 to 7. When Evil Hoof summoned Kilric again, and was killed by Duque's arcane energy hand, Evil Hoof finally realized that it was his end. No! After Garona's gorgeous dagger combo finally hurt Siafui's eyeballs, Noxus found an opportunity. The blade glowing with a mysterious golden light accurately pierced into Siafui's heart and twisted. Back off! Lothar and Garona heard Dukes shout at the same time. Both of them jumped back, causing Evil Hoof's claw, which had suddenly grown bigger, to miss. Only then did Noxus realize that a dozen or so hands of magic had appeared in the air, and each of them was condensed with a fireball the size of a human head. Almost at the same time Lothar and Garona jumped back. Dense crimson fireballs rained down like a meteor shower, bombarding Evil Hoof's body. Evil Hoof, whose vitality had been greatly reduced, could no longer condense more mana to resist Duque's fireballs. This caused the flames of the fireballs to converge like a pillar of fire. A small but very intricate fire tornado appeared in the middle of the room. Not only was it burning and tearing Evil Hoof's body, but it was also so hot that the marble floor seemed to be melting. Ah! Evil Hoof let out a final scream in the flames. Evil Hoof was dead. His entire body was burned from the inside out by the flames from hell. The stinky demonic energy spread everywhere. Most of it was burned by Duque's flames, but a little bit leaked out. The room was filled with a faint stench. With Evil Hoof's death, the teleportation gate that sent the lesser demons here also lost its support and disappeared. The lively room fell into silence for a moment, leaving only the heavy breathing of the crowd. This level of battle was nothing to Noxus. He tilted his head and looked around, only to find that none of his subordinates had fallen to the ground. It was definitely a good thing that no one had died. Being mentally prepared to sacrifice oneself and actually having someone sacrifice themselves were two different things. Without saying anything, Lothar gave Duque and Garona a thumbs up. The difference in their combat strength had been completely reflected in the battle just now. Lothar and Garona were clearly in the first tier. Other than the two of them, The only one who could help was probably Duque. The rest of the people, including the priest, were to deal with the small fries. Duque covered his nose and said in a low voice, "Everyone go out for a while. I need to collect the spoils of war." Spoils of war? Noxus was slightly taken aback. Indeed, it was only right and proper for the victors to obtain the spoils of war. However, most of the things that could be obtained on the battlefield were swords and personal items, or the enemy's flag as one's own glory. There wouldn't be too many actual good things. Now that they had killed a mid-level satyr, Duque was actually saying that it was a spoil of war? Lothar was really a little curious. There had never been any demons near Stormwind City. If killing evil creatures like demons could not only bring glory, but also benefits, it might be a highlight. For some reason, Lothar had a deep feeling that there would probably be more and more demons. The more he knew about demons, the easier it would be to deal with them in the future. On the other side, Duque began to give orders to the system elf. Scan the spoils of war for anything with strong magic energy. Yes, host. After a short few seconds, the system elf gave guidance. 10 steps to the west. The bookshelf with 3 magic books with red covers, the 3rd floor, the 5th book from the left open. Seeing Duque's actions, Garona tilted her head curiously, while Lothar was simply dumbfounded. He had never seen Duque with such sparkling eyes. This guy was clearly rich, and if he claimed to be the 2nd richest person in Stormwind City, no one would dare to claim to be the first. However, it was precisely this existence that had an undisguised ecstasy on his face at this moment. He was like a miser who had found a gold mine. On one side, he was almost crazy, and at the same time, he was absolutely unwilling to share it with others. "I'm not a black hand. I'm not a black hand." Muttering words that Lothar and Garona would never understand, Duque drifted to the left like a ghost. "Black hand?" Garona tilted her head puzzled. Why did he say the name of the orc chief? But she did not know that this black hand was not the black hand that he was referring to. Duque really wanted to find something to wash his hands with, like a bath or incense. Although Duque didn't believe in metaphysics, as a former commander of World of Warcraft, who had cleared the Molten Core instance dungeon in 1 week, and made a warlock, and a druid graduate with full equipment, Duque didn't believe that his hands were that lucky. "Ugh, Lothar, can you do me a favor?" Having killed a powerful demon, Lothar was in a good mood. With a bright smile he said, "With pleasure." Duque pointed at the huge magic book and said, "There's something in here. If I touch it, I'm afraid that I'll turn black. I'm afraid that I'll be stained with evil presence. It'll be great if you can use your sword to open this magic book." It was definitely a strange request. If it were someone else, Lothar would definitely suspect that this guy was tricking him. But Lothar could clearly sense Duque's dilemma. With a smile, he gently pierced the bottom of the big book with his gorgeous longsword and flicked it up. The whole big book flew out just like that. The big book, which weighed at least 5 kilograms, fell to the ground with a loud crash. To his surprise, the unrestrained pages didn't open. The pages were all stuck together, as if they were glued. Noxus frowned slightly. He subconsciously protected half of his body with a shield, and then the sharp blade pierced through the pages. Hiss! With a sound, Duque's heart lurched. Damn it, there really is an evil presence. However, the demonic power left by the evil hooves was a big problem for Duque. It was a piece of cake for Lothar. Under the dispelling of the godly power of the sword that Duque secretly called the King's Sword, the small demonic power was instantly swept away. The book opened, revealing a hollowed-out inside. Inside was a cloth belt and a strange ornament. Duque couldn't help but feel delighted. Chapter 109. The Azeroth of this moment was far from the situation of magic equipment in the future. When he had money after transmigrating, Duque had always been thinking about getting a set of magic equipment, but having money was useless. He didn't know if the real world of Azeroth had inherited the principle of binding to pick up in the game. Duque couldn't find any good equipment even after asking people all over the world. As a result, Duque didn't even have a decent piece of equipment. No staff, no equipment, just a set of beginner's robes from the Wong family's mage guild. This was the real world. so there shouldn't be things like soul binding or level limits in the game. Just in case, Duque didn't dare to have too much hope and touched the two items. The system notification popped up almost at the same time. Fiend's Waste. This is a mage belt of unknown origin, surging with strange mysterious energy. Obviously, it will slightly increase the power of your arcane circuit. However, this is a piece of equipment that can only be used by high-grade sky mages, so you can probably get a 20% increase now. Accessory, Capacitor. This is a magic item that connects to an elemental world full of lightning. It will collect your arcane energy pulse, and only the most explosive pulse can activate it and make it work. After you have accumulated 3 powerful pulses, it will automatically open the door to the elemental world for you, releasing a bolt of lightning to attack your current target. Hiss! Duque still took a deep breath. It wasn't a shock, but a pleasant surprise. First, it was a piece of equipment that was definitely a mid to high level item in the game, but he could actually use it at such a low level. This made Duque completely change his mind about Karazhan. Originally, Duque didn't expect to use Karazhan's equipment. After all, he was too low level, and these bosses in Karazhan, in the original history, only appeared in the middle of the game. The second was the appearance of Capacitor. As a transmigrator, Duque immediately realized the value of this thing. The explosive pulse could be understood as critical damage. Generally speaking, it wasn't easy to stack critical hits. Duque was definitely a special case, because he had the ability to cast multiple spells that most mages did not have. More than 100 hands of magic launched attacks at the same time. Even the simplest arcane missile often had a critical hit on the damage assessment given by the system elves. It could be said that the Capacitor was a top-quality item for Duque. If Lothar was Aurelia, Duque would definitely hug him to see if they could have a little flirting. Unfortunately, bearded Uncle Lothar forget it. Duque didn't hide his ecstasy, and Lothar also smiled. Good stuff? It didn't look like a demon, so it should be the relic of an unknown mage. I'm sure that mage would be very happy to be able to make good use of these things. Duque didn't act pretentious, and immediately used what he needed. There was a small pin on the Capacitor, and Duque first pinned it to the fiend girdle before putting on the belt. Almost as soon as the belt was fastened, Duque felt the magic circuit in his body change. It was a very mysterious feeling. The original arcane fire circuit had already become a large, circular river. Now it felt like a new tributary had flowed into it. If magic power was described as water, then Duque's water volume had increased by at least 20%. This was a terrifying number. Duque couldn't help but exclaim in his heart, this equipment from Karazhan, even if it's not complete, is still a huge improvement for me. At this time Garona also came up. Did you sense anything I can use? Duque looked a little embarrassed. Sorry now. Evil Hoof is not an agile monster. I don't think there are many things suitable for you. I see. Garona shrugged. It wasn't a big deal. Half-beastmen were so simple and direct. She had contributed to the battle, and if there was something suitable she definitely wanted a share. But if there was nothing suitable, she didn't mind. Garona wiped the blood on the dagger with Evil Hoof's unstained fur. Okay, how do we go now? Duque touched his chin and pondered. It was a good thing to encounter Evil Hoof as soon as he came in, because it proved that his raid team had bypassed a lot of bosses at the front gate of Karazhan. But as for what to do next, he would have to think carefully. However, Duque looked at Lothar. Lothar shrugged. Don't look at me. I did come here with Lang many times before, but we always walked in from the main entrance. We usually chatted near the opera house and watched the performances. We had never entered such a deep place before. Besides, I haven't been to the first half of Karazhan for almost 10 years. The last few times I came, I sat on the griffin and landed on the high platform. Then, Mediv opened a small portal for me, and I stepped into his study. Duque suddenly understood. He suddenly understood why there was an opera house when he played Karazhan in the game before. That was the opera house that Lang often visited Mediv with Lothar and a group of nobles when he was young. Mediv specially designed the opera house in the Mage Tower to welcome Lang. Of course, if this was the standard version of Karazhan, Duque would not get lost even with his eyes closed. But Karazhan with space disorder was a bit troublesome. Duque decided, let's go out first. Generally speaking, going higher is the right thing to do. Okay. Lothar had no objections, and his men and Garona had no objections either. Just then, a powerful and evil will suddenly connected to the huge room. If it weren't for the huge blood-red fog that enveloped the room itself, Lothar and the others even suspected that the terrifying will would directly descend into the room. Tristan, what the hell are you doing? Why is my eyes telling me that there's a battle here? Even though the tone of the voice were completely different, Lothar immediately recognized that it was Mediva's voice. Of course it was Sargeras who spoke. Oh no, we're going to be exposed. Even though they were very unwilling, Lothar and his men still put on a fighting stance and prepared for battle. But before seeing Mediv, was there any use in preparing for battle? Just when everyone was sweating, Duque spoke. He pinched his throat, and the voice that came out of his mouth was Tristan's. Sorry, master. It's Jorik teaching a few disobedient bastards a lesson. Chapter 110. It was exactly the same voice, and even the aristocratic manner of speaking and accent had been imitated. Lothar and Garona, who were beside Duque, looked like they had seen a ghost. If it weren't for the fact that the sword in their hands didn't show any signs of Duque being possessed by a demon, Lothar would have slashed him. Although they couldn't see Sargeras' expression, Sargeras clearly wasn't interested in the trivial matter of a middle-ranked demon teaching a low-ranked demon a lesson. Demons themselves were also divided into different ranks. Low-ranked demons such as imps and inferior demons were even worse than cannon fodder in front of their boss Sargeras. Sargeras, who was busy every day, snorted coldly, and then his will retreated. Lothar, Garona, and Duque looked at each other. Duque suddenly sighed to Lothar. Fortunately, you weren't impulsive. Lothar curled his lips. I should be the one saying that to you. I've lived for more than 40 years, and I'm long past the age of impulsiveness. If impulsiveness and sacrifice can solve the problem, of course I don't mind. But I'm not only the kingdom's military commander, but I also shoulder the hopes of Lang and the entire kingdom's people. Before I see Mediv, I won't expose myself. Garona was curious about Duque's voice change. How did you change your voice? Duque rolled his eyes and argued. If you know, then you're a mage. What should he say? That the system elf helped him complete the temporary voice change? That was nonsense. Since there was no way to explain it, he might as well push it to the realm of mystery. The assault team returned to their marching formation. Garona explored the way in front, while Lothar protected Duque as he moved forward. After entering the back door of Karazhan, the space was chaotic. Many times there was no path at all, only a teleportation portal that emitted an illusory light. One could only judge whether to go in or not by the faint aura coming from the other side of the portal. Moreover, most portals were one way. However, Duque relied on the system elf and didn't go the wrong way. Even Lothar was surprised, because he also found that his team should be moving higher and higher in Karazhan. Duque, how did you do it? You discovered the pattern of the portal? No, I judged it based on the humidity of the air, the dust, and the density of magic power. The density of the magic power? Noxus pondered. In fact, Duque was also talking nonsense. Being rich in mana was the most unreliable factor in Karazhan. Because this place was connected to the astral world, there were all kinds of astral world creatures. This kind of spatial rift that crossed worlds was completely unpredictable. He still relied on the Karazhan in his memory, and then let the system elf simulate and compare the nearby environment. Although there were still times when he was wrong, most of the time his choice was correct. However, Duque's appearance had turned many terrifying risks into controllable ones. Astral flare, a high-energy spherical object that shines with light. If it weren't for Duque, the team would have suffered a shocking number of casualties, because this thing would self-destruct. As a veteran player, Duque immediately associated this thing with the annoying monster in his memory. He turned an arcane impact into a palm and hit the incoming astral flare away. Seeing the astral flare explode violently, Noxus was tongue-tied. Are you sure this thing won't alarm Medivh? Duque tilted his head. No, there's a huge astral rift here. Flare explosions happen every day. Here. Even if you bring a few hundred people to a party, Medivh won't care. Another example was the ethereal thief. This monster was very unfriendly to melee professions. Although it had a human form wrapped in bandages, it was an unmistakable astral world creature in its bones. They could create a distorted space, temporarily taking away a person's strength and reducing their agility. After only staying in the spatial distortion for a dozen seconds, Noxus's face was already pale. When Duque used an instant pyroblast to teach the ethereal thief a lesson, Noxus's weak legs instantly regained their strength. After who knew how long, Duque and the others arrived outside a huge library. Duque frowned. He knew which boss was inside. You stay outside. I'll talk to that person inside. If it doesn't work, I'll call you in. But it'd be best if Noxus and Garona come in. After all, other people will only be a burden. You know who's inside? Noxus raised an eyebrow. I do. He's left a deep mark in the kingdom's history. Duke went in alone. He stayed inside for a full 10 minutes, but there was no sound of movement. 10 minutes later, Duque came out calmly. Let's go. We avoided a battle. Noxus asked tentatively. Is there anything we need to know? Yes, we might have reinforcements. You convinced the guy inside. Sort of. Along the way, Duque and the others arrived at a huge hall. There were many arcades and tall marble pillars on both sides of the hall. In the middle of the hall, on a high platform made of black and white tiles, there was a sudden flash of light. After the light disappeared, a group of figures appeared. Noxus couldn't stay calm at all. He saw his best friend and king, Lang. That Lang was so realistic that Noxus almost shouted out loud. Not only Noxus, but the elite soldiers behind Noxus also made a low commotion. However, whether it was Lang or the people around him, none of them moved. The same was true for the ferocious orcs opposite him. Of course this was the Karazhan chess stage. Since there was already Evil Hoof and that person in front of them, Duque was not surprised at all by the appearance of Karazhan chess. It seems that we're going to play a game of chess. Duque shrugged. He walked in front of a strange human-shaped statue. Suddenly, a voice came from the statue directly into the minds of Duque, Noxus, Garona, and all the soldiers. You and your friend, are you ready to become a chess piece on the battlefield and join this battle? Duque was slightly stunned. This seemed to be different from the Karazhan chess he knew. On the other side, Noxus had already raised his head and replied, We're ready. The next moment, a white light emerged from everyone's body. In a completely conscious state, they suddenly found that their souls had been extracted and attached to the chess pieces on the black and white chessboard. The voice of the statue came again. Fight, fight. The souls of the losers will be destroyed, and the winner will receive a reward. As the voice fell, everyone's expression suddenly changed. Not only because this was a battle of souls, but also because there were so many more chess pieces on the other side. Chapter 111. When he arrived at this huge hall, Lothar already had some memories. The floor tiles and wall decorations here were very similar to Medivh's study and bedroom. Based on an intuition, he knew that Medivh wasn't far from him. As an old friend of Medivh for decades, he knew very well that there were many levels in Medivh's mage tower that could not be passed to the next level. For the kingdom, for Lang, for the people, Lothar did not hesitate at all. The current situation still made Lothar frown. The difference in military strength was too great. At some point, the chessboard had become a vast plain. Apart from the flat ground that was still filled with white and black squares, the place had expanded countless times. It felt as if he had been pulled into another world. There were at least 300 orcs in front of him. They were more burly than the orcs he had seen with his own eyes. And the surface area of their bodies was also more covered. They waved their weapons, and their mouths were full of fangs as they panted heavily, emitting a terrifying aura. Lothar's subordinates were already tough enough. On average, they were 1. 9 meters tall, which would be huge men in the 7 kingdoms. But the opposite side was even more terrifying. On average, they were 5 meters tall. In front of these guys, Lothar's elite soldiers could only reach their chests. Their body proportions were like that of an adult and a child. Looking at the heavy weapons that easily weighed more than 50 kilograms, Lothar's elite soldiers couldn't help but swallow their saliva. More importantly, Lothar saw more tooth ornaments on these orcs. He remembered Garona saying that only the bravest tribal warriors, who had killed those recognized as powerful creatures alone, were qualified to break off the fangs of those creatures and make them into ornaments to wear. Lothar saw a large number of huge fang ornaments that were longer than a human palm. How is this possible? Garona couldn't believe the scene in front of her. Black Hand and his personal guards? Black Hand? You mean the strongest orc tribe, Great Chief Black Hand? Wait, you're Lothar. Garona's appearance hadn't changed. Before they set off, Lothar had given her a suit of fine steel armor that only the elite warriors of Stormwind City were allowed to wear. However, she had changed from infantry to cavalry. She had clearly become a horse on the chessboard. Lothar's subordinates all became chess pieces on the chessboard. His face was still his own, but his equipment was a little different. The feeling of the weapon was still the same. There were 2 people who changed the most. One was Lothar, because he was wearing the golden armor of the Lang from the chessboard just now. The shining lion armor with golden threads, the symbol of the king's identity, the full golden helmet that looked like a lion's mouth, and the gold-edged white cloak behind him. Other than Lang's king's sword in his hand, this was exactly what King Lang would wear on the battlefield. This kind of rebellious attire made Lothar feel extremely uncomfortable. If Noxus was the only one who experienced such a change, he would probably die of shame. For some reason, Noxus felt much better with someone accompanying him. Duque. He was wearing a scarf made of a soft white feather collar. The scarf was connected to a long cloak that reached the ground. Dressed in a clean and dry mage robe, Duke, who had an ordinary appearance, now looked like a scholar. The most eye-catching thing was that Duque was holding something that belonged to Medivh in his right hand. The artifact that symbolized the glory of the Guardians, the staff Atish Guardian. Well, it seemed that Anduin had taken the role of Lang, and Duque had become Medivh. Duque glanced at his own attire and sighed softly. Sigh, Sir Lothar, don't mind this appearance. This is an illusion brought about by magic. It doesn't mean anything. The people here are all good soldiers loyal to you, to Stormwind, and to the world of Azeroth. No one will blame you for this. Let's focus on the next battle. At this time, an existence that made Garona's entire body and soul tremble appeared. It was an orc that didn't look tall compared to the other orcs. He was hunched and wore a loose black robe. There were a few bone spikes on his back that pointed to the sky. There were a few Draenei skulls stuck on the bone spikes. He had terrible fangs with many rotten teeth, and a pair of eyes that emitted an evil green light. Gul'dan. Garona said the name that was almost taboo to her with a trembling voice. Gul'dan is here too? Lothar raised his eyebrows and looked at the orc warlock, who was dozens of steps away. Lothar had heard from Garona about the most noteworthy people among the orcs. Of course, he wouldn't forget Gul'dan, who was known as the most dangerous person. However, what was going on in front of him? It wasn't that the other party didn't want to fight, but that they seemed to be blocked by something. Wait a minute. This seems to be a death game with souls on the line. Of course, the other party isn't the real Black Hand Chief and the real Gul'dan. However, it's different from ordinary games. It seems that we can get reinforcements. Reinforcements? Lothar was stunned. Where do we get reinforcements from? Lothar wasn't the only one who was stunned. Duque was also stunned. The system actually prompted him. This is a death game with souls on the line. If you add more souls, you can have more reinforcements. This will undoubtedly increase your chances of winning. The current strength ratio is 11 to 89. Damn, this is clearly going against the wind. Isn't this forcing me to top up? Is this another stupid game where I don't have money to play? Are you kidding me? The next moment, Duque decisively slapped his own mouth. This was because he saw on the list that the system elf projected on his retina, that he could use to top up. The muscles on Duque's face showed what it meant to be temperamental in just a few seconds. Actually there are reinforcements. It's just that they look a bit bad for the city. Don't mind them. As long as it's for victory for Azeroth. Lothar was extremely magnanimous. Anyway, without you, we probably wouldn't have made it here. If you have any tricks, just use them. Just as Duque was about to summon those guys, a bright red and dazzling warning text on his retina made Duque's head hurt. Warning! Warning! The chess pieces that you've summoned are the monsters that you killed back then. They are powerful and inhumane. If you let them enter the battlefield, there's a 99% chance that they will rebel and join the enemy's camp. Damn, isn't this just throwing a rock at my penis? What's the solution? Duque almost cursed at the system elf. You just need to inject your integrity, humanity into them, and they will completely listen to your instructions in this battle. For a moment, Duque almost didn't want to top up. But he immediately felt gazes from all directions. Lothar's gaze, Garona's gaze, the elite soldier's gaze, and even the gazes of millions of humans. Duque gritted his teeth. For faith top up. Chapter 112. If it was before, Duque would have thought that he was crazy. Now he felt a bit like a gambler. He could have pulled out early, but he hoped to win everything back through a big comeback. He had put on even more moral integrity in order to win and gain more recognition after defeating Medivh. At the same time, he had also taken back his own moral integrity. Thinking deeper, it was not the case at all. The seemingly crazy move actually stemmed from a heavier sense of responsibility. Khadgar hung up. The heavy burden of fate that originally belonged to Khadgar fell on Duque's shoulders. The fate of the kingdom, the fate of mankind, and even the fate of the entire planet Azeroth were controlled by Duque's choice. Of course, Duque could not put on his integrity and let Lothar's elite soldiers fight to the death in their current state. Although they had long disregarded life and death, who could guarantee that they would be able to win by sacrificing them? Who could guarantee that there would be no sacrifice in the next round of chess? Could Duque live up to their burning and trusting eyes? Duque did not know that he was standing at a crossroads with countless crossroads. Countless people stopped at this crossroads that required great courage. Because of human instinct, people often chose to protect themselves. Perhaps they chose to escape because of cowardice. Perhaps they chose to sacrifice others because of indifference. Or perhaps they were arrogant and supercilious. But unknowingly, Duque chose to follow his heart. He wanted to change this history and change the direction of the River of Fate. So, he took a step that even he did not dare to imagine before. Lothar had always had amazing intuition. As a half-orc, Garona's senses were also quite sharp. Both of them almost immediately noticed the change in Duque. Before this, there had been a tragic atmosphere spreading among the team, and everyone was ready to sacrifice. But with the change in Duque's soul fluctuations, everyone suddenly found that they had many more companions around them. More than 1,000 funny-looking murlocs. They held extremely primitive weapons and roared at the orcs opposite them. More than 200 giant gnolls more than 2 meters tall. Among the hundreds of Nagas, there was a female Naga siren priest. Lothar's elite soldiers were dumbfounded when they were suddenly surrounded by such a large group of monsters. Our reinforcements. Duque laughed heartily. Ha ha ha. Long live Sir Marcus. Victory! Victory! Morale soared. Noxus, on the other hand, was surprised. Then he looked a little sad. He approached Duque and asked in a low voice, "Did you pay with your soul?" "What integrity? Just pick it back up after you lose it." That was what Duque wanted to say at first, but the words changed when they reached the tip of his tongue. Everyone is prepared to sacrifice themselves for humanity, and I'm the only one hiding in the safety circle. Is that appropriate? You. Staring at the orcs opposite him, Duque's vision seemed to go beyond this strange chess space, beyond Karazhan, and beyond the whole world. If there comes a day when I fall into madness because of the loss of my soul, please destroy me with your own hands. For some reason, Duke's smile seemed so light, yet it was as heavy as a mountain. Lothar suddenly found himself choking. He patted Duque's shoulder with one hand. Okay, If there comes a day, I will do it myself. But if I am lucky enough to return to Stormwind, I will spend the rest of my life sculpting a huge statue for you that the whole country can see, in the King's Valley. This was a man's promise. This was a hero's promise. Duque suddenly found that he had completely gained the approval of this epic hero, Anduin Lothar. With a faint smile on his face, Duque turned his head. Let's take care of these guys first. The combat power of the two sides had changed because of Duque's soul charge. Duque used 5% of his moral integrity as the price in exchange for an increase in combat power. From the initial overwhelming disadvantage, the two sides' combat power was 45 to 55. And this was just a simple increase in numbers. Duque could not expect these guys he killed to perform well. Noel Hogg and his little brother, the gray-scaled Naga Siren Priest, a group of male Nagas, and more than 1,000 unreliable Murlocs. Such a combination of land and sea was extremely unreliable. Not only Duque saw it, but Lothar also saw it. Duque, are these guys under your control? Yes. I plan to let the Murlocs attack from the right side first, and then the Gnolls from the left. Lothar was a man who knew his soldiers well. He immediately understood Duque's plan. Drag the left and right, then break through in the middle, and give the opponent a fatal blow. Good idea. Yes, this damn game of death ends with the death of the opponent's general. On the black and white tiles, the Murlocs took their seemingly ridiculous steps and charged under the whips of the Nagas. The whole battlefield was filled with Murlocs, and even they themselves might not understand the meaning of their cries. They formed a black mass and swept towards the orcs like a huge wave. On the surface, they seemed to have the momentum to drown the orc army in one breath. However, that was just what it looked like. The orcs standing at the front formed a green wall. The Murlocs at the front handed out their rough spears to the orc army. If there was no accident, they would pierce the chest of the orc in front in 3 seconds. Unfortunately, there was no lack of accidents in the world. They crashed into a wall of death made of heavy weapons. It was as if they had really crashed into an invisible wall. The giant hammers and axes that came smashing down on their heads easily smashed their crude weapons and their laughable fish-shaped heads into smithereens. This terrible destructive power made the impact of the entire Murlocs stagnate. The Murlocs at the front who saw this scene tried to retreat, and the Murlocs at the back who did not know the reason continued to rush forward, squeezing the space of their companions. Ha ha ha! Bastard Murlocs! Die! Die! The berserk great chieftain's forbidden guards opened their mouths, which were filled with bloody veins and fangs. They let out earth-shattering roars as they attacked while chopping melons and vegetables. Often, each swing could smash multiple Murlocs into meat paste or split them into several pieces. The Murlocs were obviously stunned by the wild attack of the other party. Chaos spread rapidly. Hundreds of Murlocs collided in the center of the battlefield, and for a moment it was a pot of porridge. If it was not for the scolding of the Nagas behind, maybe the Murlocs would have collapsed. Chapter 113. Lothar and his soldiers frowned at this pig-like teammate. It was worse than a farmer with a pitchfork, who had no combat experience at all. If they didn't know that this was Duque's cannon fodder, they would probably be cursing. 2 minutes later, the situation changed again. The orcs' formation was in chaos. After the orcs drank the demon's blood, every green-skinned orc had extremely wild genes in their bodies. Even though this was a simulation brought by the chest checkpoint, it reflected this fact. After a short confrontation, the guards of the Great Chief brandished their heavy weapons and charged into the Murlocs. However, when they were ready to kill, they encountered the gray-scaled Nagas. The male gray-scaled Nagas were not high-level soldiers, but they relied on their strong muscles and better weapons that were not inferior to the orcs. Although they were still at a disadvantage, they succeeded in attracting the attention of the orcs. At this time, under Duque's mind control, Hogg, who had died tragically in Duque's hands, led his underlings to attack from the left. Duque suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of joy. Because of the addition of the demon's power, Hogg and his underlings, who had almost taught Duque how to be a human, all grew bigger and became so burly. Now, When the system prompted that Hog's soul could be inserted, Duque was a little worried. He didn't know if this was a trash version of the Knoll, without the demon's power. One had to know that the original Knoll was less than a meter tall. This kind of body size was really worse than whack-a-mole against the orcs. Fortunately, Duque had an enhanced version of Hog, and the soul he had invested was also an enhanced version. These Knolls, who were more burly than the Murlocs, relied on their superior agility to successfully entangle more than 100 of the Great Chief's guards. Even though Blackhand's direct subordinates were stronger, they couldn't gain the upper hand for a while. Lothar and Duque looked at each other. As the saying goes, great minds think alike. They knew that the opportunity had come. For glory! Charge! Lothar waved the king's sword and charged. Male lions rarely participated in hunting. Most of the time, the task of hunting for the lions fell to the lionesses. Very few people knew that when a lion that was lazy all day attacked, its aura was so terrifying. Lothar's charge wasn't fast. He was like an arrow that had just left the bow. However, Lothar's charge gave off an unstoppable feeling that the mountains were collapsing and the earth was cracking. The heavy and firm footsteps were sonorous and forceful. His naturally wavy hair was like a lion's mane in the strong wind, giving people an explosive sense of beauty. It was getting closer and closer. Noxus could clearly see every single strand of hair on the face of the Orc Imperial Guard. He was panting heavily, and every single tooth on his mouth was so unconventional. He even vaguely felt that he could smell the foul breath of the orcs' mouths. Ha! Lothar leaped forward like a lion pouncing on its prey. He raised his shield and charged into the middle of the Orc Royal Guards. At that moment, in the eyes of the elite soldiers who were charging with Lothar, their beloved Sir Lothar seemed to be the incarnation of the god of war and the symbol of invincibility. Following Lothar's back and looking at the cloak embroidered with the emblem of Stormwind on Lothar's back, they felt like they were fighting with the god of victory. A surge of hot blood surged into their hearts, causing every corner of the warriors' bodies to boil. In the blink of an eye, Lothar had already killed 3 Orc Royal Guards. Their extremely swift counterattack in the eyes of outsiders was as laughable as clowns in slow motion in Lothar's eyes. Thrusting the sword, drawing the sword, and the fatal attack were completed in the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint. The weaker warriors couldn't even see how Lothar cut the orc's throat with the blade of his long sword. If Lothar's attack was still traceable, Garona's attack was even more strange and swift. No one could see how Garona attacked. The appearance of this female half-orc, who was petite compared to the orcs, was bound to be accompanied by the scene of several orcs covering their vitals and falling to the ground with blood gushing out of their fingers. The combination of Lothar and Garona was the most dazzling flag in the eyes of the warriors of Stormwind. No, there was another dazzling flag, Duque. 36 hands of magic appeared out of thin air, and shining arcane missiles tore through the void and poured down like a storm on the Orc Royal Guards, who were trying to surround and annihilate Lothar. Not only the missiles, but there was also an endless stream of lightning. The frequency of the lightning was so high that it almost made people forget whether Duque was using arcane missiles or thunderbolt. Duque's magic skills were so superb that he even used dazzling spells to shoot down Gul'dan's rain of fire that was trying to hit Lothar. The collision of arcane spells, lightning, and flames formed a magnificent scene in the sky above the battlefield. Duque's extremely accurate cover made Lothar remember that there was only one chance. Once they were surrounded, the humans at a disadvantage would only be drowned in the raging sea of orcs and face destruction and despair. The performance of the 3 made the elites of Stormwind almost forget time and space, and subconsciously locked their eyes on the 3 of them. They only came back to their senses when the first orc warrior, who was struck, let out a pained wail. They focused all their attention on this battle where their lives and souls were on the line. For some reason, there was a burning passion in the chests of the warriors. They couldn't wait to end this battle with victory, and then tell the heroic deeds of these 3 legends to their comrades, relatives, and everyone who paid attention to the world of Azeroth. Lothar pulled out his longsword, and the last Orc Royal Guard in front of him let out an angry and desperate scream. When the burly body that was like a wall collapsed, there was no longer any barrier between Lothar and the great chief's black hand. The battlefield instantly fell silent. Another tall and burly orc with reddish-brown skin with explosive muscles appeared. He raised his huge warhammer high and waved it at Garona. King against king, general against general. Traitor Garona, your opponent is me, or Grim Doomhammer. Beside him, Gul'dan leaned on the infamous skull staff and pointed at Duque from afar. Kid, your opponent is me, Gul'dan. Duque's pupils suddenly shrank, and the breath in his chest seemed to carry a certain excitement. He didn't know what the situation in this chest space would be like. He only knew that in this group of people, only he could fight against Gul'dan. Come. Chapter 114. Stormwind City's night sky was as calm as ever. The darkness of the night came as usual, just like how people always believed that the light of dawn would always come every day. In the dark night, crimson flames constantly shone through the fog in the distance, declaring destruction and terror to Stormwind City, an enclave that hung alone outside of the human political center of the entire continent. To the west of Stormwind City, the sea that had not changed since the last descendants of Thoradin the Great arrived 1,000 years ago shone with starlight. With the clear moonlight hanging over the sea, one could vaguely see that Stormwind Port, which had been dark once night fell a year ago, was now brightly lit and filled with sails and masts. Other than the sound of the rolling waves, there were also the voices of people coming from afar. Looking at Stormwind Port, King Lang suddenly sighed to the Queen. My dear, I've been thinking about a question. Is Duke Marcus our kingdom's destined guardian? If you look at the current situation, it's obvious that he is. That's right. The Queen gently tightened her grip on Lang's arm. Without his Stormwind Port, Stormwind City might have already started to collapse. Before the orcs came, everyone thought that the new Stormwind Port that Duque built was just a useful supplement to Stormwind City's revenue. As the war progressed, everyone realized that Stormwind Port and Duque's fleet actually controlled the kingdom's fate, becoming its pulse. Stormwind City was located in the south of the continent. With all the roads to the north blocked by the orcs, the sea became Stormwind City's only lifeline to the outside world. In this era, entering the port at night was extremely dangerous. But in order to transport the military supplies that Stormwind City lacked, the old captains of Stormwind City and the maritime kingdom of Kultiras not only transported during the day, but also to save space in the port and increase the transport capacity, they even chose to enter the port at dusk, unload the goods overnight, and leave at midnight. With the efforts of a group of captains and sailors, all kinds of supplies were continuously transported from the other human kingdoms and the dwarves' iron furnace castle. Women and children who needed to be evacuated were transported ahead of time, all the way north across the sea to South Shore. Since the 7 human kingdoms had yet to come up with a unified opinion on the orcs' invasion, the aid given to Stormwind City at this stage could basically be regarded as civilian assistance. Most of the nobles in the north scoffed at what Lang's messenger said about the orcs' large-scale invasion and how great the harm would be. What's the big deal about orcs? We've been killing the trolls here for thousands of years, but we still haven't killed them all. This was the opinion of most of the nobles. They expressed the most malicious suspicions and speculations regarding the fall of half of Storm City. The only fortunate thing was that the Alterac Kingdom agreed to lend South Shore to settle the refugees from Stormwind. As for the other 6 kingdoms, they allowed Lang's proposal to purchase supplies, allowing the people of Stormwind City to purchase all kinds of military supplies and fiercely cracking down on the illegal merchants who inflated prices. At the same time, Lang was allowed to send people to recruit volunteers and mercenaries from the 6 kingdoms. However, this was not enough. Only Lang, who was facing the orc rampage head-on, knew that this would require the 7 kingdoms to declare an all-out war at the same time, gathering the 7 kingdoms, as well as the dwarves and the elves as allies, before it would be enough. As soon as he thought of this, Lang felt a wave of suffocation in his heart. So far, everything that Duke had offered, every idea that he had offered had been good. For example, a new type of blockhouse. That was something that Duque left behind, a fellow called Makarov was in charge of. It had a strange name, cement. As for how this thing was made, Makarov was tight-lipped. Even Makarov himself said that it was only a half-finished product. The effect was obvious. The newly designed hexagonal blockhouse was very good at delaying the orcs' offensive. This blockhouse was about 3 stories high, made from this cement mixed with stones and sand, and in a short 2 to 3 days, it became extremely sturdy. Under the command of an unknown member of the Mason Brotherhood, Edwin Van Cleef, Duque's personally appointed name, in the outskirts of Gold's Hire, one of the barriers of Stormwind City, no less than 500 of these blockhouses were built in just a few days. Even the largest orc catapults could not easily destroy this kind of blockhouse. The narrow shooting holes made it so that the orcs could not even reach in. A large number of Duque's trained javelin throwers hid in these blockhouses, and from various shooting holes, they gave the orcs a heavy counterattack. When the orcs used the cruelest and most brutal way to destroy the blockhouse, the harpooneers could use the tunnel that they had dug beforehand to drill into the next blockhouse, through a tunnel that was so narrow that only humans could pass through, and continue to kill the orcs. There were even stories of some outstanding javelin throwers achieving great feats that even the bravest of Stormwind City warriors couldn't do. That guy killed 36 strong orc warriors by himself, and left a mark on the orc's forehead with a javelin mark, which became the best proof of this feat. What made Lang not know whether to laugh or cry was that Stormwind had an additional army, the Murlocs. These abominable monsters, that once caused incomparable headaches for the residents of the Elven Forest, had now become the guardians of the people of Stormwind. The Murlocs let out inexplicable cackling sounds, and occupied almost every river in the Elven Forest that was more than 5 meters wide. Any orc who dared to go to the river to get water would be baptized by the Murlocs' crude javelins. Everything that Duque did had greatly helped the whole of Stormwind. Recalling the changes that Duque had made to the kingdom, Lang was deeply moved. I wonder how his and Anduin's raid is going. I hope they can come back safely. It's okay. If they were killed, I think Sargeras would be the first to come and show off. The queen comforted Lang gently. Lang suddenly smiled bitterly. Nearly 1,000 years ago, my ancestors came to Stormwind City, cut their way through brambles, and started a magnificent era for the people. No matter what, I don't want Stormwind City to be destroyed in my hands. You won't. Instead of thinking about this, why don't you think about how you will reward them for their achievements, if they return in triumph? How about erecting a statue for them in the King's Valley? Good idea. At this moment, Duque, whom Lang and the entire upper echelons of Stormwind had placed high hopes on, he was facing the most dangerous battle since his transmigration. Because his opponent was Gul'dan, even if this was just a fictional Gul'dan created by some unknown magical principle. In this strange chess space, Gul'dan was still incomparably powerful. Breathing in the slightly cold air, Duque felt the smell of blood and dry heat in his nose. He couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart, telling himself that he was writing a legend that belonged only to him at this moment. Chapter 115. Duque raised his head and glanced upwards. In this chess space, time and space had already disappeared. Through the battlefield that was filled with swords and blades, there was only an endless black and white grid in the distance, while the sky was empty. The only thing he could pay attention to was his opponent. On the other side, Lothar was fighting Black Hand to the death. It was not an easy task. The orcs could afford to drag it out, but the humans couldn't. Once the Murlocs and Gnolls retreated, it would be the end of the humans. Anduin had no choice but to attack. That was definitely good news for the orc chief, who preferred to fight head-on. The huge hammer was heavy and swift. Blackhand's arm strength was beyond human imagination, and the violent wind pressure that seemed to cause a small mountain to collapse every time he swung the hammer made Lothar feel suffocated. However, Blackhand's movements were so fast that every swing of his hammer seemed like an illusion. Lothar was caught off guard, and was forced to clash with the hammer and sword. Lothar was almost killed instantly. A longsword was a light weapon, and compared to a heavy weapon like a hammer, it was not very durable. Besides, Blackhand's sledgehammer was specialized. It weighed more than 300 kilograms. Almost at the instant of the clash, Lothar was already cursing himself in his heart. Why did he have to fight with this monster, whose strength was comparable to that of the legendary giants? This was because this hammer strike had almost broken his king's sword. Although the longsword in Lothar's hand was a light weapon, it had actually inherited the will of Thoradin the Great, and was filled with the desire for freedom and survival of countless ancestors. The king's sword had already surpassed the epic level, and was close to the level of an artifact. Although the blade of the sword was thin and slender compared to Blackhand's hammer, it was something that would break easily. In terms of hardness and tenacity, well, Lothar still remembered how he used to poke holes in the marble with the king's sword when he was young. However, when such a semi-divine sword clashed with Blackhand's hammer, it still produced a muffled groan that went straight to Lothar's soul. Even if it wasn't to the extent of the groan, it still made Lothar give up on the idea of a quick victory. Lothar glanced at Garona from the corner of his eyes. The ferocious female orc was currently beating up Blackhand's aide-de-camp Orgrim. It seemed that Garona had the upper hand. Garona's figure flickered as she used the cold gleam of her dagger to slash at the spots where Orgrim's flesh had been exposed. If Orgrim was a human, even if his vitals weren't severely injured, he would still die from excessive blood loss. It was a pity that the vitality of the orcs could not be measured by human standards. Besides, it was obvious that he was not a real living orc. Orgrim's ferocity did not diminish at all. Rather, Lothar was more concerned about Garona. Thieves had a natural disadvantage against warriors. The offensive seemed fierce, but if the warrior's counterattack succeeded, the thief would be defeated. Warriors were thick-skinned, and had countless opportunities to make mistakes. Thieves, on the other hand, could lose their lives if they made a single mistake. Of course, Lothar was most worried about Duque. Duque gave Lothar a strange feeling. His aura was that of an earth rank, but his attacks felt like that of a sky wizard. Alright, let's say that Duque was the same as his master, hiding his strength. However, Gul'dan gave Lothar the feeling that Gul'dan's strength was comparable to Mediva's. Even if the strength of Gul'dan's image was greatly reduced, Duque would have to face an opponent that was at least at the Morningstar rank. How long could Duque last? Lothar could not help but feel anxious. Duque was indeed in huge trouble. Gul'dan's strength was ridiculously high. The system genie was already sending out all sorts of warnings on Duque's vision. Duque could not help but curse the system genie. "I'm courting death by challenging Gul'dan's image. Stop giving me more warnings." Only then did the system genie calm down. Low-level magic was destined to be unable to shake a higher-level mysterious force. From the very beginning, Duque had known, if not for the capacitor that he had just used, Duque would not have been able to compete with Gul'dan's image no matter what. That kind of crushing mana could cancel out any offensive or defensive spell cast by Duque without a trace. With the capacitor, everything was different, no matter how the chess level in Karazhan had changed. In essence, the chess level was still one of the bosses in Karazhan. If this real world also had things like item levels, then the difficulty of the capacitor level would be similar to the chess level, or even the same. This was a bug that could be exploited by Duque, allowing him to hurt Gul'dan in the chess space with such low strength. It was still that gorgeous and blinding barrage of arcane missiles. The swooshing sounds of the arcane bullets tearing through the air had been echoing in everybody's ears since the very beginning. The arcane missiles that were blocked by Gul'dan's mage shield were not the main point. The main point was the lightning effect that was triggered after the arcane missiles hit. Capacitor was an accessory that had no limit on the frequency of activation. For Duque at the moment, it was no less than a true divine artifact. All the bystanders could hear was the incessant crackling of the electric current. At first, there was only one mage hand around Duque with electricity, but later, the frequency of the lightning was too high. Everyone could only see that the entire space around Duque was filled with blinding electricity. Countless bolts of lightning shot out from Duque's vicinity, pouring towards Gul'dan's direction. The wriggling electric snakes let out ferocious roars and swept across the floor tiles wantonly. They even left terrifying black electric marks on the white spaces of the floor tiles. Impossible! Gul'dan roared angrily. He kept releasing destructive flames at Duque. Every single ball of flame, regardless of whether it was quality or quantity, Gul'dan had the advantage. However, every single ball of flame was destroyed by the countless lightning arrows in the air. Gul'dan's mirror image could not understand. Why was this happening? How could a low-rank sorcerer, who could only cast weak arcane missiles, be able to cast such a large number of lightning attacks that could hurt him when he was in such a weak state? He began to doubt himself. Was the human his opponent? Or was it the strange accessory on his waist that was his opponent? How could this kind of brainless accessory that put the cart before the horse actually threaten him? If Gul'dan had real self-awareness, he would probably go crazy. Chapter 116. The scene in front of his eyes was extremely weird. Lothar was so infuriated by Duque that he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't know how to face Duque at all. At first glance, Duque looked so tall and mighty. His short black hair was all standing up because of the arcane energy waves. Wearing the classic robe of the Royal Mage group of Storm City, Duque stood at the center of the battlefield with 2 clusters of blue and purple arcane energy in his hands. Countless hands of magic, made of white light, floated in the air, and the light from the continuous barrage of purple and blue arcane bullets reflected the relaxed expression on Duque's face. He wasn't very tall. Perhaps because he was too young, Duque was even shorter than everyone on the scene, but everyone felt that he was taller and more stalwart than anyone else. His pair of black eyes were like obsidian embedded in his eye sockets, deep and wise. Countless arcane lights flashed in his, or his hands of magic's palms, and then went to the place where they should go. It was to block Gul'dan's fireballs, or to save a human elite soldier, who was almost killed by the enemy's orc guards. Lothar had seen more than once that his men were in a crisis of certain death, but they were all saved by the lightning arrows that Duque released with multicasting. A flash that was similar to a blind, or a direct attack. Duke's every attempt to save the situation seemed to be understated, yet it was just right. Those who didn't know what was going on might think that God Duque was so awesome that not only could he easily beat up his opponents, but he also had the time to cover his teammates. In fact, that wasn't the case at all. Duque was on the losing side. Lothar finally couldn't help but roar. "Hey, Duque, do you need help?" In fact, nobody had time to help Duque, but the problem was that Lothar was worried. "Calm down. I can't win on my side, but don't think that I'll lose either. I can stall for a day and a night if I want to stall." With that said, Duque even had time to instantly cast Flame Burst to help Lothar smash Blackhand's face. Good job. Taking advantage of the gap created by Duque, Lothar gave Blackhand a heavy blow. The tip of his sword, which was sharper than a nail, easily pierced through the gap of Blackhand's armor, leaving a wound at least 5 centimeters deep. Lothar was absolutely certain that the sword had stabbed the edge of Blackhand's lung. "Huh!" Blackhand let out an angry roar. He turned around and glared at Duque with his bloodshot eyes. Blackhand actually gave up to Lothar and charged straight at Duque. "Hiss!" Noxus sucked in a breath of cold air. He knew what would happen to Duque if he was hit by Blackhand's hammer of destruction. He had no choice but to chase after them madly, even if it wasn't Blackhand's true body. That mountain-like terrifying figure could easily make even the most valiant of warriors feel weak when they saw it. Noxus couldn't imagine what would happen to Duque, who didn't have much actual combat experience, against a Black Hand. Duque's death caused the entire situation to collapse? Even if he didn't want to admit it, Duque was already the most important member of this assault team. In a sense, Duque's existence was as important as Lothar's. Bang! Bang! With 2 sounds, 2 elite soldiers of Storm City, who tried to stop Black Hand, were easily sent flying. The huge iron hammers, one on the left and one on the right, were just ordinary pendulums, but that kind of unstoppable force was not something an ordinary human could withstand. There were no more obstacles between Duque and Black Hand. At this moment, Gul'dan's mirror image also began to attack. The raging flames enveloped Duque's body. From Lothar's perspective, he could only see Duque's blurry figure. Not only the flames, but Lothar also felt the arrival of the curse. Curse of Pain, and Ignite, as well as some unknown spells, several warlock spells that could cause continuous damage poured down on Duque. Putting aside the fact that Duque had to face Black Hand, just Gul'dan's attacks weren't something that Duque could handle. Not good. Not good. In that instant, Lothar felt as if his heart had been pierced. He almost wanted to throw his sword to save Leyland. However, the gap between mediocrity and genius was revealed in this instant. The mana that Duque had released was instantly restrained in his palm, in less than a tenth of a second. Noxus did not know how much control over arcane energy was required to achieve this. All he knew was that he had only seen magic techniques of this level on Mediva's body. Even Morning Star wizards could not compare. If the previous retraction could be considered an illusion, then the highly condensed arcane energy in his palm was instantly magnified again, turning into a clear giant palm with 5 fingers. It slapped the Great Chief's Black Hand away. Just this move alone was enough to make Noxus clap his hands in praise. This was not the end. Orc's battle instincts were terrifyingly high. While Black Hand weighed more than 250 kilograms, his body was never clumsy. Lothar could clearly see that Black Hand's body was beginning to adjust in midair. Even if he struck again, he might not be able to find an opening. At this moment, Duque used Flash. His entire body suddenly turned into a beam of light and disappeared. When his figure reappeared, he was already next to Black Hand. He spread out his right hand, and a cone-shaped cold sea breeze suddenly erupted from Duque's palm, covering Black Hand's body. This move did not depend on the attack power of Duque's magic, but on the speed reduction effect that ice magic often had. A visible layer of frost covered Black Hand's body, from his feet all the way to his waist. This caused Black Hand's efforts to adjust his posture in midair to go up in smoke. Most importantly, Lothar suddenly discovered that because Black Hand could not adjust his body, his entire back was facing him. Through the gap between Black Hand's armor and helmet, Lothar had a wonderful opportunity to kill Black Hand. In the chest space, the Great Chief Black Hand relied on his amazing strength, but this shameless man actually wore 2 sets of armor. The outside was a steel plate that was a full 3 centimeters thick, and the inside was an unknown leather armor. This made it difficult for Lothar to find an opportunity to kill Black Hand. But now it was different. Because of this rare body position, Lothar's longsword was able to smoothly stab into Black Hand's heart. Chi! The king's sword pierced the muscle between the back and the shoulder blade, straight into Black Hand's heart. For a moment, Lothar was worried whether this strange chest space would renege on its promise, such as counting orcs as undead creatures or something. Obviously, Lothar's worry was unnecessary. Suddenly, hundreds of lightning bolts struck down from the empty sky. Boom! Almost every soldier who was engaged in a fierce battle became absent-minded. Fortunately, the chess level abided by the rules. After the lightning bolts struck, all the enemies, including the Murlocs, Nagas, and gnolls summoned by Duque, disappeared without a trace. Did we win? Lothar was still a little skeptical. Chapter 117. Congratulations, warrior. You should be rewarded for your heroic battle. Come on, open your spoils of war. The voice of the statue, for some reason, suddenly became incomparably pleasing to the ear. The elite soldiers of Storm City, who were still fighting to the death just now, were a little unaccustomed to this sudden victory. However, since their boss had killed the boss of the other side, this victory was unquestionable. Almost everyone was breathing heavily. Only Dooku had a calm expression on his face. Surprisingly, the system elf started to flatter him. Oh, my dear host, your performance was too outstanding. How did you know that killing the Black Hand would guarantee victory? Humph. Back then, I was an awesome person who soloed the Karazhan chess stage. Duque replied smugly, but in his heart he thought, hey, do you think I would tell you that when I played here in the game, Every time, it was the other 9 bastards who drank water, went to the toilet, or farted, and I was the only one who was busy. Over time, it became a habit to play alone. Sigh, it's all tears. However, Lothar was puzzled by the treasure chest that appeared so blatantly on the side of the huge chessboard. Could it be a trap? Lothar frowned. No, Duque and Garona said in unison. Duque blurted it out in a funny manner, while Garona came to a conclusion after a quick inspection. Lothar tilted his head, and the muscles on his face seemed to twitch. He looked at Duque. You do it, or should I? Seeing Duque take half a step back in fear, Lothar knew the answer. Okay, I'll do it. Lothar really didn't know why Duque was like this. In Lothar's opinion, Duque was a combination of contradictions. He was so young, but he was extremely experienced in battle. He was obviously fearless when facing the enemy, but he was afraid to inspect his spoils of war. What kind of quirk was this? Okay, mages seem to be mysterious and neurotic guys. Compared to Duque's minor problems, Lothar regarded Duque as a perfect saint. Lothar didn't even extend his hand, and the brown wooden treasure chest that was studded with gems opened on its own, revealing the good stuff inside. A sword, a ring, a leather pauldron. First was the sword. Looking at the unique scimitar shape and the red blade, Duque guessed that it was the king's protector. It was a one-handed sword that did not appear in history but in the game. Even though it had decent attributes, the fact that a scimitar was classified as a sword still made many players ridicule it. Duque was impressed by Lothar's one-handed sword, which was a favorite of defense warriors. What was interesting was that out of all the warriors present, not a single one wanted it. What? None of you want it? Duque was stunned. Noxus waved the king's sword in his hand. A warrior's weapon is the most important. We won't change our weapon unless it's absolutely necessary. In the face of life and death, the slightest difference in touch can be fatal. The other warriors nodded. Well, fine, you guys have a point. Then I am mage, won't have to worry about stealing equipment. I'll give it to Windsor to show off later. There was no such thing as binding, in this world anyway. Duke grandly took the defensive warrior's treasure for himself, and casually put it into the space bag he bought at a high price. Yes, there were dimensional bags in this world too, but they were extremely expensive. A linen dimensional bag produced by Dalagen that could only hold 8 items, that did not weigh more than 10 kilograms, actually cost 100,000 gold coins. And it was a fixed price, no bargaining allowed. Damn, if it wasn't for the fact that Duque was in urgent need of it, he would definitely exchange all the gold coins and beat that profiteer to death. Duque thought to himself, I must go and practice the tailoring skill when I get back. There was also a leather pauldron, cruel shoulder blade, which naturally belonged to Garona. The female half-orc immediately took off her metal pauldron and put on a leather pauldron, looking as if she would beat up anyone who tried to snatch it from her. All right, take it if you like it. Noxus was not angry at Garona. The last ring of circulation, was a typical mage ring. When Duque put the ring on his left thumb, he felt the magic circuit being expanded again. A new small circuit was built, and magic seemed to flow into the ring through the arteries of the finger. After being amplified by the ring, it flowed out of the vein with a surging feeling. System notification. You are wearing a magic item, ring of circulation, that is far beyond your ability. Obviously, the maker of this ring is quite friendly to low-level spellcasters. The gentle magic circuit buff allows you, an earth mage, to get a 30% bonus to the original attributes of the ring. The damage caused by your magic effects, and the chance of a magic critical hit, are slightly increased. Looking at Fiend Belt, Capacitor, and Ring of Circulation on his hand, Duque's desire to level up became even more urgent. He didn't know what the higher-level magic world was like. Obviously, it was a world that he couldn't imagine. There was no reason, just a hunch that if he defeated Medivh, he would be able to level up. That was what the aura of fate told Duque. At this moment Noxus came up to him. Did you alarm Sargeras just now? Duque shook his head. I don't think so. A big shot like Sargeras is also very busy. After returning from the chess space, I sensed several interworld astral communications. Don't forget, Sargeras is the boss of the Burning Legion. Noxus nodded. The enemy was too strong enough to make most mortals despair. 10,000 years ago, almost all the strong people on planet Azeroth had gathered to barely destroy the portal and drive Sargeras away. Could they do it with just these few people? The hesitation was only brief. Noxus quickly shook his head to get rid of the bad thoughts. He turned his head and said to his subordinates, "Gentlemen, the road ahead is still difficult, but I believe we can still overcome it. For the battle later, let's rest for 15 minutes, and then continue on our way." None of Noxus's men had died in the battle just now. The most miserable guy was only moderately injured, and with the priest's healing spell, he had barely recovered his combat power. In any case, this result was already very impressive. Defeating a demon boss in a row and breaking through a strange chess stage had raised everyone's morale a lot. "What's next?" Noxus asked. "I don't know. The space in Karazhan is chaotic. If we're lucky, we'll go to Mediva's bedroom or study. If not..." Chapter 118. The location of the Karazhan Wizard Tower itself was a chaotic intersection of space and time. It was not unusual for anything to enter. Mediv had set up his wizard tower here for two reasons. Firstly, he wanted to do research, and secondly, he wanted to trick his enemies. Duque did not dare to guarantee what he would encounter next. When Mediv was traveling in Karazhan, he could see all kinds of chaos in Karazhan, such as magical creatures and ghosts everywhere, floating stones, and the void outside the tower. This was what Mediv had been like when he was still conscious. It was a very strange place in itself. Duque still did not understand why Khadgar, who served such a dish at this time in the game's history, could bring Lothar to Mediv. Now it was Duque's turn to lead the team. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. "Sigh, I wonder how Reggie is doing." "Don't die, Reginald." Finally, with some free time, Duque found Windsor's name in the list of followers in the system prompt. This made Duque feel a little relieved. The future Marshal Windsor was currently in trouble. After paying the price of 20 casualties, Windsor and the other elite soldiers killed the special existence guarding the gate, the demonized hunter Atuman, and his demon warhorse Midnight. In order to better advance at the front gate and attract the attention of Sargeras, who was controlling Mediv, Windsor decisively chose to move forward. Originally, Windsor was prepared for a fierce battle. Who knew something unexpected would happen? Oh, praise Stormwind City. His Majesty has finally sent people to save us. When he first saw these guys, Windsor was still wondering if it was a trick of the demons. But soon Windsor was drowned. These well-dressed nobles in front of him actually had powerful backgrounds. Baron Rayford Drugel, Count Crispin Farrens, Countess Dorothy Millsdeep, Countess Catriona Warnindi. Damn. Those scary green dwarfs are everywhere. We didn't have time to evacuate to Stormwind City, so we came to Karazhan to seek protection from Guardian Mediv. Mediva's butler, Mr. Moros, took us in. But recently, a series of unknown events have happened in Karazhan. Many demons have come out. It's too scary. We can only stay in the dining room on the 3rd floor. These nobles were complaining to Windsor and the other warriors about their terrible experiences. Windsor was also embarrassed. He originally wanted to kill all enemies on sight, but who would have thought that a bunch of grandmasters would appear? One too, except for the weakest Baron Drugel. There was a large group of counts. If one were to encounter these fellows anywhere else, it would be enough to make any soldier bow and scrape for a long time. Now that he had encountered them, he could not ignore them. If he did nothing to save so many nobles, once this matter was exposed, he would be hanged on the gallows when he returned to Stormwind City. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a piece of unfortunate news. Mr. Mediv, the protector you rely on for protection, might have been possessed by the demons of the Burning Legion. We are on our way to take down Mediv. Before Windsor could finish, the nobles on the other side exploded. Oh no! Impossible! Oh my God, this is too scary! Soldier, as the Count of the East of Elven Forest, I order you to protect us as we leave. Immediately. Although Windsor repeatedly emphasized his duty, the nobles screamed as if they had lost their minds. They used all kinds of threats and temptations to force Windsor to obey them. The only fortunate thing was that these nobles did not have servants or attendants with them. Otherwise, they would have been even more overbearing. As a last resort, Windsor could only divide a third of his forces to escort these nobles back the way they came from and leave Karazhan. Then, when Windsor reorganized his forces and went to a banquet hall on the second floor, he saw a human. No, it should be said that it was a demonized human. The thick evil aura on his body could be clearly felt from more than 10 meters away. Hello, humans not on the guest list. I am Karazhan's butler, Moros. Unfortunately, Master Mediv has ordered that all outsiders not on the guest list are to be treated as enemies. So please die, soldier. Seeing this gentle-looking old man in red explode his eye-catching red and yellow suit in an instant and turn into a huge satyr demon, Windsor suddenly had a question. Why did Moros, the butler, who was already a demon, let the nobles go? Not good. Windsor's heart trembled. It was as if he had been electrocuted, and Windsor's limbs were numb from the electricity. However, he and his men did not have the leisure to do so, because at the corner of the huge corridor, behind the gorgeous pillars, in various rooms of various sizes, many satyrs poured out. These demons that had been transformed from humans waved all kinds of weapons, or simply used their claws to attack Windsor and his men. At the same time, near the top of the Karazhan Mage Tower, after resting, Duque, Lothar, and Garona continued to advance with their men. After defeating the enemy in the chest checkpoint, a door opened behind the strange statue. Behind the door was an ordinary long flight of stairs, but when Duque and his men climbed the stairs, they suddenly found that the space was distorted again. This flight of stairs was not the one that led to Medivh's bedroom as expected. Instead, it led straight to the roof. In fact, when he saw the roof, Duque already had a bad feeling. When he saw the huge figure with bluish-green skin, Duque still said in his heart, "Holy crap! It was a gigantic demon." He was dressed like a strong man. He wore 2 pauldrons, gauntlets, belt, and leggings. Most of his skin was exposed. His explosive muscles could be seen with the naked eye. For example, he had an extremely fit six-pack, and his thigh muscles that revealed vertical lines. Of course, he also had the signature thick tail of the Eridar demons. More than 10,000 years ago, the demon king Sargeras went to Argus to recruit the entire Eridar race to join his blazing crusade. Archimonde and Kil'jaeden, 2 of the 3 leaders of Eridar, agreed to join. The Eridar race was what humans called the demon race. Generally speaking, demons were divided into 2 colors, scarlet red and bluish green. In the Burning Legion, the 2 Eridar demon bosses did not belong to each other and would not cooperate. The representative of the scarlet-skinned demon was Kil'jaeden, and this demon was obviously on Archimonde's side. Prince Malchezer. Chapter 119. The sky was gloomy. Next to it was the outline of the Mage Tower, the Outer Tower, and the Auxiliary Tower. But this was not the sky that could be seen from the outside of Karazhan. The distortion of space and time made it so that when people looked out from the huge rooftop square, they could only see gray chaos. Evil energy tumbled in the void like boiling soup. Strictly speaking, Prince Malaxer should not be here. Prince Malaxer's appearance here gave Duque the feeling that he was the transmigrator. Duque looked at this huge demon that was as tall as 3 people and frowned. This big guy, who was supposed to be the final boss in the future, now looked more like a watchdog that had responded to Sargeras' summons. He declared the demon's ownership of this place to every intruder that successfully arrived, which meant that the power of the King of Demons would descend upon everyone present and punish those who displeased his master. In fact, that was what Prince Malaxer did. He frowned almost as soon as he saw Duque, Lothar, and the others. This dark green demon with 3 mysterious tentacles under his chin roared, "Puny humans! I don't know how you came here, but since you can come here, it means that the trash I arranged in front has either been defeated, or you have deceived the entire defense system, so that I can't receive any news of your invasion." Lothar did not speak. He still held the shield in his left hand and waved his sword in his right hand. Then he winked at Duque. Good job. He did not say it out loud, but that was what he meant. Prince Malaxer proudly took a big step forward. His huge hooves stepped on the limestone tiles, which made a sizzling sound due to the inexplicable high temperature. I don't know how you did it, but that's not important. What's important is that you will all die here, and your souls will become mine. Submit to me, mortals, or else your souls will suffer for 10,000 years. The prince's loud roar echoed throughout the entire rooftop. The strange surrounding space made Prince Malaxer's voice tremble. Lothar's elite soldiers suddenly trembled. They never lacked courage, but some enemies could not be dealt with courage alone. However, you're just a dog that only knows how to fart. If it were your boss Sargeras, saying these words might be able to scare people. But you? Far from it. Duque replied. I hate this guy. Can I get rid of him? Garona gave off an obvious feeling of agitation. Lothar. All right, ladies first. Duque rolled his eyes. The group of elite soldiers expressed that they were temporarily deaf. Duque was speechless. He really didn't realize that Lothar wasn't a good person either. He actually let Garona take the lead. If it was Duque, he would have done the same. Garona, with her high agility and speed, was very suitable for probing the enemy. Alright, Duque wasn't a good person either. Garona closed her eyes. This female orc's combat power was definitely top-notch. As expected, those who entered the heroic domain and had a strong history in Azeroth, none of them were fake. For some reason, Duque felt that Garona's strength seemed to have increased by another level. Her figure was so fast that it felt like Prince Malchezer was surrounded by Garona's afterimages. If it was just the thief's sprint and slice, it definitely wouldn't have such a cool effect. This was clearly one of Garona's unique skills. Garona's bone dagger wasn't a divine weapon, but some mysterious power seemed to have been injected into it, and the dagger's attack power had increased significantly. Deep wounds that could be considered shocking to humans kept appearing on the prince's body. Almost every time he dodged, there would be a few terrifying wounds that were 5 centimeters deep and more than half a meter long on the prince's exposed skin. However, for a demon with extremely strong vitality, these were at most superficial wounds. You green-skinned sow, do you dare to fight me head-on? Prince Malchezer was furious. The next moment, he painfully discovered that one of the antennae on his chin, that looked like a penis, was almost chopped off by Garona. Ah, you dare to do this to me. Prince Malchezer was finally fed up with Garona's high-speed attacks that were more disgusting than a flurry of flies. He no longer cared about acting cool and directly used his strength. Following his angry roar, 4 stone giants wrapped in green flames descended from the sky and guarded the prince from all sides. Hellfire. No, to be precise, this was not a true hellfire. That was because a true hellfire had a certain level of intelligence. It would walk like a human and attack its own target. Prince Malchezer's hellfire was a pillar of flames with a human shape. Of course, the effect was obvious. The surging power of the flames immediately pushed out in all directions, and in an instant, with the prince at the center of the entire rooftop square, 4 waves of flames appeared and exploded outwards. These waves of flames posed a threat to almost everyone on Lothar's side. First, Garona couldn't withstand the continuous waves of flames, and with a flash and a backflip she retreated. Next was Lothar. Clearly, Lothar had some kind of magical item that protected against elemental power, but it was unknown if it was prepared to be used against Medivh. Anyway, when the waves of flames reached Lothar, the power of the fire elements automatically dissipated and turned into a gale slightly stronger than a strong wind. Other than blowing up Lothar's long hair, which could be used to sell shampoo advertisements, it had no real effect. Next was Duque. An ethereal shield of ice appeared on Duque's body, blocking the hot air that was blowing towards him. But for the average Storm City elite soldiers, the area affected by these 4 waves of flames became an insurmountable death zone. This was not a power that could be easily matched by mortals. Among the elite soldiers who had spread out to prepare for battle, the elite soldier closest to the prince was the first to be unlucky. Ordinary shields might be able to defend against arrows and swords, but they definitely could not defend against flames. The guy who bore the brunt of the flames was not only sent flying by the surging waves of flames, but also dragged away the other elite soldier, who tried to hold him. Everywhere he looked, people were thrown off their feet, and that was not all. Almost everyone was covered in large and small flames. Cries of alarm rang out incessantly. "Stand down! Put out the fire!" Lothar's expression was not good. This not only meant that the three of them were the only ones left in this battle, but it was also very likely that these soldiers would not be of any use in the battle with Medivh later. The opponent's strength was completely beyond imagination. Chapter 120. Lothar didn't order Duque to do anything. He knew that Duque would definitely satisfy him. Tacit understanding was something that was cultivated through battle after battle. Whether a teammate was reliable could be seen through 1 or 2 battles. It was Lothar's first time seeing such an all-round genius like Duque. Lothar was very relieved. Sure enough, Duque raised his hand and used the lowest level blizzard. There were no lethal icicles, only rapidly falling snowflakes. The cold hexagonal snowflakes quickly covered the parts of the soldiers that were on fire, and quickly extinguished the flames on their bodies. Every soldier who regained their senses looked at Duque with gratitude. Compared to the middle-aged priest who was still in a daze, Duque's response was godly. The faces of quite a few soldiers holding long swords were deathly pale, large droplets of cold sweat dripping down the sides of their hair. However, not a single one of them suffered a fatal injury, let alone died. This result was obviously far from satisfying Prince Malcheser. This high-ranking demon of the Eridar race would never have dreamed that a transmigrator would be among the challengers. Duque knew most of his skills like the back of his hand. He roared, "Mortal, do you think this is the end?" With a wave of his hand, a black light bloomed from the prince's hand. In an instant, 15 elite soldiers felt as if their bodies had been hollowed out. It was a very frightening feeling. Within their paper-thin skin, there were no muscles, no blood vessels, no blood, not even bones. It was as if all their organs had disappeared, and they had become a paper man with an empty shell. It was an indescribable feeling of terror. Almost every soldier who was hit froze in place. They didn't even notice the dark energy that shrouded their heads. 3 seconds. Only 3 seconds. The moment that evil dark energy exploded, these 15 soldiers would lose their lives forever. Even their souls would be bound in the chaotic mage tower of Karazhan, becoming some kind of sad existence. Run! Lothar didn't know what it was. He only knew that these old fellows that he had trained and had accompanied him through life and death countless times would all die here if they didn't run. Being mentally prepared that everyone was going to die, and actually dying were 2 completely different situations. Noxus was very strong, but no matter how strong he was, there was no way he could save 15 soldiers at the same time. On the battlefield, 1 second of hesitation was enough to be fatal. Even if many of these elite soldiers had already reacted and started to run towards the area outside of the Shroud of Darkness, how far could they run in 3 seconds when they were fully armored, holding shields and swords, and carrying at least tens of kilograms of weight? Death was almost inevitable. However, just when the dozen elite soldiers were about to be killed, Duque's hand of magic appeared again. 72 hands of magic dragged all the soldiers out of the attack range of Shadow Nova before the princes. Shadow Nova burst out, looking at himself flying out of that dark area, and then looking at the place where the dark energy had corroded the ground to the point where it was creaking and emitting an ominous smell. Even a fool knew that Duque had saved their lives once again. Before the raid on Rakazan, they only admired one person, Anduin Lothar. From today onwards, they silently added another name in their hearts, Duke Marcus. Not only did Duque's unimaginable response surprise them, but Duque's calmness, decisiveness, selflessness, and indescribable view of the overall situation made them admire him from the bottom of their hearts. "Thanks, Sir Marcus. I owe you my life. In the future, when Boss Lothar doesn't want me anymore, I, Panga, will be your follower. I can still watch the door. Most people would be indignant and angry when their subordinates' hearts were bought. But Lothar was touched that his subordinates' lives were saved. "Well, you bastards, if I really die, I'll allow you to follow Duque. Now get lost, don't get in the way. This is not an enemy you can deal with." Lothar's elite soldiers retreated far away from the rooftop square. Lothar cracked his neck. "Duque, do you have any good suggestions? If you're not afraid of fire, you can try to lure this guy out. I bet that he has a limited number of pillars of fire. If we weren't in the fire, I would definitely be able to kill this guy." Garona seemed to be indignant that she was forced to retreat. "Ditto." Duque shrugged. "That's settled." Hearing Duque's words, Prince Malchezer's body trembled. He almost thought that he was hearing things. The pressure in the space suddenly changed. It was a violent aura that could topple mountains and overturn seas. Accompanied by a furious roar. A voice that burned with raging flames actually caused the ground to tremble. "Who gave you the confidence to defeat me? The Burning Legion is invincible." Duque was unmoved. "Uffed." Lothar and Garona looked at Duque at the same time. "I just smiled and didn't say anything. Is that wrong?" "No, I just think that you're braver than I thought." Lothar gently touched Duque's arm with his shield, then charged forward without looking back. Lothar charged. With every step Lothar took, the light on his body grew brighter. This was not a feeling, nor was it an illusion. Lothar was really glowing all over. For a moment, Duque almost suspected that this slightly unreliable world of Azeroth had a paladin profession in advance. What made Duque even more confused was that he saw the following lines of data on his retina. After inspection, Anduin Lothar used a super rare potion, Titan Potion. His HP has temporarily increased significantly. Lothar used Colorful Miracle Potion. His magic resistance has temporarily increased significantly. Lothar used Special Flame Protection Potion. Lothar activated the special amulet of the Archbishop of Stormwind City. Lothar received an unknown super powerful exorcism blessing. His damage against demons has greatly increased. What was pioneering? This was pioneering. Even though Noxus himself was a boss, this dutiful warrior still brought his own first clear potions when he was exploring another boss. He had not even asked Duque for half a gold coin as compensation. Azeroth's #1 teammate. At this moment, Duque was so touched that his nose was running. Garona and Duque watched as Lothar charged forward and cut Prince Malchezer's Hellfire with 2 slashes. Chapter 121. To Duque, it had always been a big question mark as to how strong the fellow who stepped into the realm of heroes in Azeroth was. Purely from the perspective of physical strength, agility and vitality, Lothar did not exceed the limits of a human. However, with the support of the warrior's unique rage power, Lothar made a series of unimaginable moves. A normal charge and a warrior's special charge were 2 completely different concepts. Even though a warrior's charge could only be used once in a battle, the powerful impact this time was very precious. It was the first time Duque had seen Lothar's charge. It should be said that Lothar did not even use his full strength against Evil Hoof. Lothar's military boots made a high-speed grinding sound, and in the next instant, his entire body suddenly turned into a stream of light, crossing the more than 10 meters between him and Prince Malchezer. According to a normal human's charge, Lothar would only rush to the prince's feet, but Lothar's charge unreasonably rushed into the air. "You!" Prince Malchezer's words came to an abrupt halt, because he saw a shield that was not big, but was big enough to cover his entire ugly face, rapidly enlarging in his vision. Bam! The shield bash that came right at Kieran's head sent the prince into a daze. The strong impact landed on the prince's nose, and the unsuppressible soreness and pain made the prince want to cry. This was not the end. The feeler on Prince Malchezer's chin that looked like a penis that was almost chopped off by Garona just now was really chopped off this time. Lothar deliberately took the blame for Garona's mistake with his strength. Just like that, the hatred created by Garona was perfectly inherited by Lothar. Duque had once heard of such an unreliable legend, that the males of the Eridar tribe treated the 3 tentacles under their chin as precious as their own little brothers. Whether this legend was reliable or just fabricated by some unscrupulous author, there was no way to know. In any case, when the tentacle was directly chopped off by Lothar with the king's sword, Prince Malcheser was enraged. He was truly enraged. Go to hell, human. He was not knocked down by Lothar's charge and shield. The prince displayed the strong physique of the demon race. His body, which was leaning back due to the heavy blow, suddenly bounced back like a spring under the effect of his powerful waist and abdomen. His fist, which was larger than a calf, came crashing down, quick and ferocious. This was the problem that humans often encountered when fighting against giants. The huge difference in size would cause humans to be unable to withstand the inhuman strength if they were not careful and were hit by a fierce blow. Humans would be crushed and instantly killed by the terrifying difference in strength that could not be made up for with training. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. The high-ranked demon couldn't hide the surprise on his face. How is this possible? In Prince Malcheser's eyes, Lothar, who was covered in heavy armor that only increased his weight, but was meaningless to the demon race, should be a piece of delicious meat on a chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. But Lothar flew up. It was not an adjective but a real kick. He once again rose more than 2 meters in the air. From facing the prince's big ugly face, he flew to the prince's head and struck again. Only then did the prince see from where Lothar had just landed that there were 2 hands of magic there. It was this pair of illusory palms constructed from arcane energy that perfectly became Lothar's fulcrum when Lothar had nowhere to borrow strength from, supporting Lothar in unimaginable acrobatics. Ah! The moment the king's sword pierced Malcheser's skull, a dazzling golden light blossomed. A pair of seemingly burning golden wings of light extended from Lothar's back, breaking through the chaotic void on the roof of Karazhan, creating an additional passage between Karazhan and the world of Azeroth, which was located in the gap between the astral world and Karazhan. This passage glowed with golden light. On the sword, a golden storm filled with a holy aura blew up. The chaotic wind caused Lothar's handsome long hair to flutter erratically, making this future lion of Azeroth even more charismatic. At some point, Garona, who was supposed to cooperate and attack, also stopped in her tracks. Standing on the head of this huge demon, who was at least 6 meters tall, Lothar's expression was very calm, as if his soul was wandering in the sky. He seemed to be feeling something, savoring something, or listening to the melodious sound of chimes coming from a tall building in the distance. At this moment, even Duque heard the sound of metal clashing coming from above. Raising his head abruptly, Duke realized that he had unknowingly stepped into a strange period of history. Ever since he came to this world, at every moment, there were thousands of voices singing his legend. Every minute and every second, there were thousands of wills swearing to inherit his ideals. As if responding to Lothar's golden wings of light, Duque saw an illusory figure in the floating golden clouds on the battlefield. It was a knight. His face was clearly a blur in the eyes of the bystanders, but everyone could feel his gaze on Lothar. No, he was not only looking at Lothar, he was also looking at the entire human race. That's right. The crown on his head proved his identity. The only emperor recognized by the 7 major human kingdoms in the history of Azeroth, Thoradin the Great. His gaze fell on the sword in Lothar's hands that was piercing the demon's head. He smiled. It was a smile of approval. Those who fight for humanity will receive my protection. After leaving a soft murmur, Thoradin the Great's figure disappeared. The next moment, the sword in Lothar's hand emitted a bright light. Prince Malcheser's huge greenish-blue body, starting from the head that was pierced, seemed to turn into gravel in the wind and disappeared in the golden light. Duque was stunned. He never thought that Prince Malcheser would be a problem for him, Lothar and Garona. Just one big move from Lothar was able to instantly kill Prince Malcheser, who would become the final boss of Karazhan in the future. That was a bit too much. The prince's figure disappeared. Lothar descended with a gorgeous eagle-like dive, his metal boots hitting the bluestone ground with a clear clang. There was no joy of victory on Lothar's face. Instead, it was as if he was facing a great enemy. Not only him, but Duque and Garona also had the same expression. "Come out, old friend. I can already feel your aura." Hee. With a chuckle, the surrounding scenery suddenly changed. For some reason, they had already arrived at Mediva's workshop inside Karazhan. In the middle of the three, the superboss Mediv, who directed the entire incident at the dark portal, appeared. Chapter 122. Wherever Mediva's fingertips pointed, there would be a bright purple arcane radiance. As mysterious veins of light flowed from top to bottom, the things in Duque, Noxus, and Garona's field of vision were being constructed at a high speed. Power that could not be understood and measured by science surged out, and the surrounding scene was like an oil painting with its canvas removed, revealing its true form. When the last round of dazzling light bloomed, everything changed. The void and chaotic sky became the roof of Mediva's workshop, and sunlight shone through the colorful glass windows, filling the entire workshop with a holy atmosphere like a church. There were 12 huge marble pillars around the workshop, forming a cloister around the periphery. In the middle of the workshop was a large pool with a diameter of 20 meters. It was filled with a blue liquid that was slowly churning. Duque only needed a glance to understand what it was. Mana. Mana that was rapidly condensed. It had surpassed the gaseous state of mana itself, and turned into a liquid state. Every time the liquid mana rolled, if one were to focus all their attention on it, they would discover that there would be dazzling lights exploding in front of their eyes, as if flowers of light were blooming, constantly repeating the process of budding, blossoming, withering, and dying. The power contained in it was so terrifying that Duque could even imagine that once the mana in the pool went out of control, the interweaving light energy comparable to a nuclear bomb would instantly spread to the surroundings, turning the land within a radius of 500 kilometers into a wasteland. Compared to this astonishing mana pool, the pile of metal parts that Mediv had placed beside the pool, that were as tall as 3 people, seemed insignificant. Looking at everything in front of him, Duque once again confirmed one thing in his mind. Mediv, who was known as an astral mage, was definitely at the peak of mastery in the use of the element space. Time and space were recognized by almost everyone as the strongest elements. In fact, even though he brought Lothar and Garona to Mediv, Duque still felt his scalp go numb. He didn't know how to deal with the Mediv possessed by Sargeras. Fortunately, only the 3 of them were teleported to the workshop. Mediv did not deal with Lothar's men. At this moment the Mediv spoke. The Mediv laughed, and there was an indescribable evil charm in his laughter. "Since you call us old friends, why do you have to point your sword at my chest?" Noxus's gaze fell on Mediva's feet, who was standing beside the mana pool. His eyes scanned carefully from his feet to Mediva's head. When he looked at Mediv again, Lothar's voice became very gentle. "Yes, my sword is not pointed at my old friend. It's not pointed at Mediv, who is a close friend." Noxus sheathed his sword. "We're not from the same world from the beginning. You're a high and mighty guardian. As long as you don't abdicate, you can have an almost endless lifespan. On the other hand, Ryan and I are just 2 seemingly noble people, but in reality, we are lowly mortals. Why did we become friends?" "Yes, why?" A playful smile appeared on Mediva's face. He even ignored Garona, who was quietly moving behind him on the left, and ignored Duque, who was motionless behind him on the right. "It's because of your humility and magnanimity that you gained our recognition. Do you still remember that 20 years ago, you had just defended Azeroth again and came back injured? But you still bore it, and created an ice cube to cool the forehead of a child with a fever in the slums. Do you still remember that day? Do you still remember?" Lothar softly recounted his past with Mediv. Mediv didn't interrupt him, and just listened with a smile. After an unknown period of time, Lothar finally came out of his memories. When the last word of Lothar's words fell, Mediva's face finally showed a playful expression. "It's a beautiful story, isn't it? Unfortunately, it's meaningless." Mediva's face finally sank. The next moment, the entire workshop trembled. Meaningless? No. Everything I have said is meaningful. Because I always believed that the generous and benevolent Mediv I knew was still alive in some form somewhere. And you, Sargeras, I'll pull you out of my old friend's body and make you scram back to where you came from. Lothar's voice was like thunder rolling in the empty workshop, echoing left and right. The anger contained in his voice seemed to want to burn up Sargeras's dirty and sinful soul in an instant. Lothar pulled out the king's sword again, and the dazzling golden light on the sword was like the light of dawn that chased away the darkness along the entire horizon at dawn, splitting the entire workshop that was filled with Medivh's terrifying magic into two. Lothar's aura was astonishing, but the depths of Medivh's slightly playful eyes were filled with disdain. Sargera's voice sounded calm and indifferent. Lothar, is this your trump card? It's a pity that you took it out too early. Otherwise, you might have given me a little surprise. A true king doesn't need to hide himself, Lothar said firmly. This was also a small drawback of the king's sword. The path of a king was the righteous path of a king. Emperor Sorodin's will on the sword would not allow the wielder of the sword to do such a disgraceful thing, like stabbing someone in the back or sneaking up on the opponent. Moreover, from the beginning, Lothar didn't really intend to hide himself. The so-called king isn't even an ant in front of me, the invincible king of the realms. An incomparably terrifying will spread out from Medivh's body. As a direct opponent of Sargeras, Lothar was definitely the first to bear the brunt. The will of the demon king wasn't just simply terrifying. Countless images, large and small, continuous or intermittent, flashed across Noxus's spiritual sea, constantly impacting Noxus's will. Those weren't ordinary images. They were images of worlds that had been destroyed by Sargeras's burning legion over the past 10,000 years or so. The cruel and crazy demons turned beautiful planets into barren, scorched lands, and killed millions of all kinds of creatures. Slaughter. Destruction. Destruction. This was the main theme of the Burning Legion. At this moment Lothar heard the cries of billions of creatures, and tasted their sorrow, pain and despair. Before he knew it, Lothar had already knelt on one knee. His face was pale, and his forehead and hair were all dripping with cold sweat. His eyes were pitch black, as if he was about to faint. Noxus felt like a lone boat in a boundless sea of rage. Under the boundless black storm, he was hopelessly enduring the onslaught of the storm, and his boat would be destroyed at any time. He was completely subdued by Sargera's terrifying will. Chapter 123. At this time, Duque's clear voice came from behind Sargeras. Fallen Titan, destroyer of worlds, lord of the Burning Legion, great king of demons. Have you forgotten your tragic defeat in Azeroth 10,000 years ago? Or when you were the son of the former guardian of Azeroth, Aegwin, you accidentally fell and became retarded at birth. I really don't know where your invincibility comes from. About 25,000 years ago, Sargeras betrayed the Pantheon Council formed by the Titans of Creation, created the Burning Legion, and began his burning expedition. After taking in Kill Jaden, an Archimond from the Eridar demon race, Sargeras had a smooth-sailing life for the next 15,000 years. He won every battle. However, 10,000 years ago, during the invasion of planet Azeroth, he was defeated by the native race of Azeroth, and the derivative species of the experimental creations left behind by the Titans. Although Sargeras could blame that failure on his inability to directly descend to planet Azeroth, or on the fact that the dragon soul created by the power of the entire dragon race destroyed the portal, a failure was still a failure. The failure in Azeroth had become the biggest stain in his life, ever since he betrayed the Pantheon and established his own power. He still hadn't been able to wash it off until now. Needless to say, in order to sneak into Azeroth this time, he didn't hesitate to pretend to be killed by Aegwin, a small guardian, and then corroded and devoured the soul of Aegwin's son Mediv. For the great boss of the Burning Legion, this couldn't be said to be a very degrading thing. One could imagine that even if he won this time because of this method, he would be ridiculed to death by his old rivals, the Titans, when he faced his other old rivals again. No, perhaps it was since the failure of the invasion 10,000 years ago that broke the Burning Legion's legend of invincibility. Sargeras could no longer be as glorious as he was 10,000 years ago. This failure was the biggest pain in Sargeras' heart. Alright, at this moment, Duque had actually touched on the sore spot. How could it be as simple as sprinkling salt on the wound? It was as if she had forcibly ripped open his scar, used a hook to open the wound, and made it look brand new. Then she sprinkled some wasabi and chili on it. Finally, she whispered into Sargeras' ear to remind him of the pain. All that was left was to call a song and dance troupe to dance in front of Sargeras and celebrate the 10,000th anniversary of Sargeras' death. The series of high and mighty honorifics at the front of these words was just to slap the face at the back. It wasn't just a slap to the face. It was a slap to the face that was swollen. Sargeras abruptly turned around, casting his gaze on the young wizard, Duke Marcus, whom he had looked down upon even more. Insolent ant, did I give you permission to speak? Mixed with Sargeras' terrifying anger that soared into the sky, the boundless pressure that seemed to be able to burn the entire planet shifted from Lothar's body, and suddenly pressed down on Duke's body, like a mountain pressing down on him. Hearing that Duque had helped him out of the predicament, Lothar was still a little happy, but then he widened his eyes, and subconsciously extended his left hand, that was tied to the shield towards Duque. This was because he realized what Duque was about to face. That kind of endless fear was definitely not something a young lad could bear. Having seen the trials and tribulations of life, bearing the death of his beloved wife, and facing the death of his comrades, Lothar's first half of life could be said to be incomparably rich. Even Lothar, who thought that his mind had long become as hard as iron, didn't dare to say what would happen if Sargeras' pressure continued just now. What would happen if it was suddenly Duque who had to bear all of this? Lothar simply couldn't imagine. In his opinion, the young wizard Duque had already done a perfect job. He had successfully used his wisdom and magic to bring him and his men to Mediv. If it were any other wizard in this world, they might not necessarily be able to do this. Just this alone made Lothar feel that Duque was already a little hero. However, Mediv, who was controlled by Sargeras, was too terrifying and powerful. Lothar really didn't dare to imagine the scene of Duque's guts being torn apart. But his extended left hand was destined to be unable to grab anything, and nothing could be stopped. At this moment Lothar, Garona, and Sargeras were stunned at the same time. That violent pressure that should have been able to crush the mind of any mortal in the world was completely unaffected by Duque. No matter how strong your aura was, he still looked like he was taking a leisurely stroll. He even winked at Sargeras and stretched out his right pinky. Actually, your aura can be stronger. My small body can still take it. What the hell is this? What exactly happened? The face of Mediv, who was possessed by Sargeras, was full of confusion. He really couldn't understand why even the insignificant human named Anduin Lothar, who had the strongest willpower among the three of them, almost succumbed to his Demon King's aura. But Duque didn't fall for it. This wasn't some kind of immunity in his mental state, but a kind of blind confidence that should have been built on past achievements. That's right. It should be that Duque felt that he had an absolute psychological advantage over Sargeras. Sargeras was about to go crazy. His eyes were filled with fear and resentment. Duque's excessively young face was filled with confidence from start to finish. This wasn't the first time he had thought of asking the system elf to help him separate his spiritual sea after being afflicted with fear, so that the information from the outside would first pass through a relatively independent space, and after filtering and analysis, it would be delayed for a 10,000th of a second before entering his mind. Also, Duque's confidence was really based on achievements. Duque muttered to himself in his heart, sigh, "Am I supposed to tell you that back then, for the sake of equipment, I would go on with both the big and small accounts every week, and that I would take turns with your two subordinates, kill Jaden and Archimond, 100 times? Perhaps it was a joke, or perhaps it was a mental victory, or perhaps it was Duque's firm belief that as long as he brought Lothar and Garona to Medivh, history would be on the right track again. Anyway, it didn't matter whether the others were afraid or not. Duque wasn't afraid, and so he just smiled and annoyed Sargeras. Ugh, it feels so good to show off in front of a super boss. I've changed my mind, Aunt. You'll be the first to die. Sargeras let out a deafening roar. At this moment, Lothar made his move. The king's sword blossomed with dazzling golden light, and became one with the stream of light when he used charge. Medivh, who was controlled by Sargeras, quickly turned his staff and pointed it at Lothar. At this moment, Duque saw a strange scene. The passage of time seemed to have become stagnant, and every speck of dust, every ray of light, and even everything around him were moving in a strange trajectory. The female half-orc legendary assassin, Garona, who had been extremely low-key and concealed her aura and presence, made her move. Chapter 124. How strong was Garona? This had always been a question mark. The legendary assassin who would be infamous for killing King Lang in the future was still a half-orc who fought for the humans she loved. It was simple. The whole tribe was against her, and no clan was willing to accept her. But the humans, especially Lang and Lothar, chose to accept her. This made Garona, who had lived a miserable life as a slave, feel warmth in her heart. Perhaps it was to repay a debt of gratitude, or some other emotion. Garona's performance was very pure and straightforward. With a light stomp of her feet, the two curved bone daggers in Garona's hands were already hanging upside down like a crescent moon. Before she attacked, there was a distance of 10 meters between her and Medivh. For many mages, this was a safe distance, and they could clearly see each other's every move. But in the blink of an eye, the sharp blade of the dagger was less than 2 centimeters above the back of Medivh's neck. Shadow Step, a unique skill for thieves. Garona relied on it to easily cross such a long distance, disappear from the shadows, and then reappear in the shadows. When her dagger approached Medivh's vital point, Duque also felt a chill in his heart. Why did he cooperate with Lothar, and the Medivh possessed by Sargeras to argue? Wasn't it to attract Medivh's attention and give Garona a chance to deliver a fatal blow? In order to cover Garona, Duque even rushed to use Calm and Mind and Pyroblast before Garona could attack, and instantly threw a blinding fireball in front of Medivh. Duque did his best. Even if at this moment, Duque wasn't the person involved in this attack, he was still able to clearly understand how fierce and dangerous this attack was. There was no terrifying aura of stars exploding above her head, causing the world to collapse, nor was there any thunder. Garona's dagger did not carry a trace of smoke. There was no sharp sound of wind breaking, and there was not even a trace of aura. If one had to ask what it was like, it would be a kind of hunting that was close to animal instinct. Yes, Medivh was the prey, and Garona was the hunter. Even though they were 10 meters apart, Duque still felt that he would not be able to dodge this attack. This was a real world. Perhaps Medivh was very powerful, but in the end, Medivh was still immortal. One would feel pain if they were injured, and if they were seriously injured, they would die. If Garona could kill Medivh in a second, it would be a joyous occasion. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. If time was a fast-forward movie, then it would definitely be frozen at this moment. There shouldn't be any sound in the air. But the moment Garona appeared behind Medivh, a strange gurgling sound came from the air. Duque, Lothar, and Garona discovered at the same time that the air in the workshop that was illuminated by the warm sunlight was frozen in less than 1/100th of a second. This effect was completely the super upgraded version of Duque's de Song's cold prison. Under the effect of Medivh's vast magical power, all the water vapor in the entire workshop was frozen into a white mist, and then turned into sand-like ice particles that fell like dust. The 12 huge pillars were instantly covered with white frost, and every place in the workshop that had water in it was instantly frozen. When water froze, its volume would increase. The ice cubes from different places collided fiercely for the limited space, and then there was the sound of ice cubes shattering. Duque's big fireball and Lothar's charge were both interrupted by the huge wave of cold air. that gushed out of Mediva's body. And the two were almost blown away. And Garona, who was in the frozen core area, turned into an ice sculpture in the blink of an eye. Not only Garona, but the space several meters in diameter around Mediv was also frozen, because of the cold air. The frozen Garona's posture was very beautiful. She lifted her left knee, and straightened her right leg. Her arms that were like the wings of a white crane, almost completed the final joint attack, and stabbed the sharp blade into Mediva's neck. It was just a little bit, but it became a huge chasm. Mediv turned around with a face full of anger, and looked back at Garona, who had turned into an ice sculpture with a determined expression, without a trace of hesitation. Bastard! Lothar seemed to be a little confused as to why Mediv was so angry. Originally, in Lothar's imagination, Garona was already a dead person. As long as Mediv broke Garona's ice sculpture with his staff, this extremely straightforward half-orc beauty in his impression would immediately die. Mediv did hit it with the head of his staff. A crack on the ice sculpture quickly spread in all directions. This blow, which was infused with some magical power, brought about a strange reaction on Garona's body, and the crack spread from Garona's strong body. Pieces of ice, big and small, peeled off from Garona's body like a broken mask. With the loudest cracking sound, when the shattered ripples spread to Garona's entire body, Garona, who was already a little dazed from the freezing air, fell out of the ice sculpture while shivering. However, the moment she saw Mediva's face, Garona's face was filled with incomparable stubbornness. Mediv hit Garona. Yes, he hit her. He hit her with his fists. The dignified magic level Mediv actually hit Garona, in front of the dumbfounded Lothar, and the imaginative Duque. You bitch! You actually want to kill me? With a punch, Garona's left face suddenly had a bruise. Because of the green skin of the orcs, this was actually not obvious. Why can't I kill you? Garona, who had temporarily lost the ability to move because of the ice, asked stubbornly. Bitch, why don't you think about who spared your life? Let an assassin like you who pretended to be an emissary live. You actually don't know how to be grateful, and you still want to kill me? Mediv, or perhaps Sargeras was still angry, punched her again. Humph. It's my greatest shame to be possessed by a weak male like you. Wait. Something seems wrong. Lothar's facial muscles instantly froze. And Duque suddenly remembered a secret. That was the story of a savior named Mediv in the future. Mediv, one of the founders of the new Tirisful Council. In order to resist the invasion of the world of Azeroth by the ancient gods, he ran around everywhere. In particular, this Mediv was a mix of orcs, Draenei, humans and titans. That's right. He was the child of Mediv and Garona. Garona used to be one of the assassins sent by Gul'dan to pretend to be an emissary and assassinate Mediv. Mediv killed all the orc assassins except Garona. Then Garona was sent back to deliver a message to Gul'dan, and Gul'dan sent her to Mediva's side as a spy to serve the interests of the orcs. The Maddie civilization knew all of this, but they kept her here. The official explanation in the game was that two lonely souls were attracted to each other. This description was so artistic. Now it didn't seem artistic at all. It was clearly someone's dirty words when he was having a headache. Whether it was Mediva's dirty words or Sargeras's dirty words, this was no longer important. The important thing was that this kind of dirty words almost blinded Duque's dog eyes. Chapter 125. Bitch. You have to face your own fate. Mediv, who was under Sargera's control, was in a relationship with Garona, a female half-orc, in an orc's way. Mediva's punches fell like raindrops. This was nothing to Garona, who had been treated with disdain and torment by her fellow orcs since she was a slave. Male. Other than your evil magic, is that all you have? I look down on you. Sargeras was even angrier. On the other hand, Noxus felt that he had the obligation to stop all of this out of chivalry and gentlemanly demeanor. He roared, "Let her go!" and charged forward. But he was sent flying by an unknown magic spell from Mediv. And Duque was just a bystander. Although he already knew that this was history repeating itself, Duque still felt that it was an eye-opener. But old Max, do you know that you're so awesome? Aren't you afraid that your children will run in front of you and sing, "I call you Dad. You hit my mom"? Idiot. Do you really think you can join the insignificant human kingdom? Come on, face your fate. A mysterious light appeared on Mediva's hands, and countless runes the size of ants flowed on Mediva's palms, the back of his hands, and his arms. The next second, a mysterious force shot into Garona's brow. It was an extremely terrifying image for Garona. She saw the future, a future that she didn't even believe in. The gentle and magnanimous Chief Lang Rin, who represented the entire human kingdom and accepted her, took her in, and gave her a home, was actually killed by her own hands. The image was so clear and felt so real. Garona was completely stunned. Lang's expression of disbelief, Lang's son Varian's horrified expression, and the painful expression of the queen who cared about her the most appeared in front of her. There was also the smell and touch of blood, and the horrifying feeling of her digging out Lang's heart with her own hands. Everything was extremely realistic. All these little details piled up, causing Garona to fall into a frenzy. This is impossible. Garona's body suddenly trembled, and she collapsed to the ground, her whole body twitching nonstop. Bastard, what did you do to her? Lothar roared and charged again. I'm just letting her face her inevitable fate. Mediv, who had returned to his normal self, had a mocking and ferocious look on his face. Go to hell, Sargeras! Lothar roared and rushed forward. Duque followed him silently. He summoned his signature 36 hands of magic and rained arcane bullets at Mediv. Of course, he knew that it was useless. Such low density, low damage arcane missiles might be able to torture orcs or murlocs, but it was nothing to Mediv, who was at the pinnacle of mysterious power in this world. Duque could clearly see that before the sea of arcane missiles could even get within 3 meters of Mediv, they were automatically disintegrated by the high density of mana that escaped from Mediva's body. That was not what he wanted. Duque was playing the role of Khadgar. According to the nature of fate, as long as he integrated himself into the 80% compatibility, he might be able to replace Khadgar's position and successfully kill Mediv. In the history, this was how Mediv dealt with Garona first, and then he used his longsword to tease Lothar. While they were playing fencing, Khadgar, who had been using magic just a moment ago, suddenly ran over and stabbed him to death with his longsword. This history was once thought by Duque to be ridiculous. How could the Mediv that even Sargeras feared, that experienced Mediv, be killed so easily? But when he thought about it carefully, it made sense. Think about it. No matter how strong a mage was, if he didn't use magic and instead ran to fight in close combat without any protection, wouldn't he be courting death? Moreover, the moment Khadgar made his move, the remaining good part of Mediva's soul also jumped out and fought with Sargeras for control of the body. It would be strange if Sargeras didn't die. Duque was reenacting that part of history. Ha ha ha. Puny human. You are so weak that I can defeat you without even using magic. Mediv, just like in the history, took out a shiny silver longsword from his spatial storage item and faced Lothar. Mediva's small body was not much better than Duque's. If it was a simple duel between swordsmen, Lothar would teach him a lesson in no time. Even if Orgrim or Illidan's soul came in, it would be useless, let alone Sargeras' possession. Sargeras' method was very simple: cheating. He directly used the slow spell to reduce Lothar's speed and strength to a level slightly lower than his own, and then they fought fiercely. Haha, what number 1 swordsman of Stormwind? Your strength is only so. He had seen shameless people, but he had never seen someone so shameless. Lothar wanted to say, "Fight me without magic if you can," but he didn't say a word. Of course, he knew that Sargeras was toying with him, and the weak Duque couldn't dispel such a high-level spell for him. Duque. Seeing Duque continuously releasing those low-level trash spells, Sargeras snorted disdainfully at Duque. The great Sea King Duque was ignored by Sargeras just like that. Duque was still the best actor. He roared, and even his neck was so red that it seemed like 2 dicks could be stuck in it. He poured out his magic and released those useless offensive spells. Ice arrows, fireballs, arcane missiles, arcane impacts, and almost all the conventional magic attacks were used by Duque. Everything was a pretense. Looking at Mediva's back, Duque sneered in his heart. Sargeras, you're arrogant. Arrogant. When I stab my sword into your back, when you discover that Mediva's weak body is your fatal weakness, I really look forward to seeing the Burning Legion's #1 boss shocked face. Duque thought that he had done it flawlessly. When he reached his limit and pulled out the King's Protector to teach Sargeras a lesson, space seemed to be strangely distorted. There seemed to be a strange distortion in space, and then a warm heat appeared on his neck. Duke tilted his head, and in the next moment he saw himself. A headless version of himself. A version of himself who was spurting out mouthfuls of blood. His vision spun, and then, all he felt was the coldness of the ground. Mediva's boots entered Duque's field of vision. Wait! Something's wrong. I'm dead. Sargeras's voice suddenly reached Duque's ears. Idiot, you think I didn't guard against you? If it was my useless disciple Khadgar, I might have ignored him. But you, I've always been guarding against you. Ha 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 ha. Ridiculous. Too ridiculous. Duque died. Chapter 126. No. When Lothar saw that Duque had been killed, he suddenly felt that the world around him had become blank and empty. Apart from Duque's corpse and the Mediv possessed by Sargeras, he couldn't see or hear anything. An unprecedented grief and indignation surged in his heart like a volcanic eruption. He used to think that he had seen through life and death, and was used to seeing his comrades die. He was no longer afraid, and he could treat the death of everyone around him coldly. In fact, when he faced this moment again, Lothar still found that he couldn't do it. From the moment he met Duque, Lothar only felt that he was a talented and flamboyant kid. When he was Duque's age, he vaguely remembered that he had done a lot of crazy things. But whenever there was a problem, there was always Lang, the prince, to take care of it. At that time, Lothar only had pure admiration for Duque. When the name Sea King Duque appeared, Lothar originally didn't like this kind of person who relied on business to rise. But as time passed, Lothar changed his view. Everything that Duque did proved that he was responding to the crisis, for the benefit of Stormwind, and even for the benefit of the entire human race. If Duque was just that, then Duque would be a very good assistant minister. But everything that happened in Karazhan made Lothar secretly raise his evaluation of Duque to an unprecedented level. Brave, wise, smart, kind-hearted, and highly principled. This was definitely the template of a top young hero. Lothar quickly realized that if Duque was allowed to grow, he would be the pillar of Stormwind's next generation. He and Lang were still in the prime of their lives, but they would grow old after all. Prince Varian was still young, and when the time came, it would definitely not be Lothar who would help Varian to the end. Duke Bolvar for Dragon was a very good candidate. Unfortunately, he would at most be an assistant minister in the ordinary domain. After losing Mediv, the Stormwind Kingdom needed a new flag in the field of magic, no matter how one looked at it. When he killed Prince Malcheser, Lothar had secretly made a decision. If he succeeded this time, he would definitely recommend Duque to the throne when he returned. However, just as Lothar made up his mind, Duque was killed by Sargeras in front of him with the face and body of his old friend of decades. A Guardian-level slow, and a plain horizontal slash ended the hope of Stormwind's future. The death of a genius was the most painful. Aha! Noxus roared furiously like a berserk lion, while activating a certain item that was supposed to be a trump card. His entire body radiated a burst of golden light. Lothar, whose strength, speed, agility, exorcism, and other attributes had all soared, suddenly approached Mediv. Oh! Mediva's face revealed a slightly surprised expression. The king's sword, which was emitting a bright light, suddenly slashed down. What greeted it was not Mediva's magic, but a huge metal arm with a blue base and silver edges. Even with the king's sword's almost indestructible sharpness and powerful exorcism effect, it was still unable to break through the defense of this arm. The long sword and the metal arm collided, causing dazzling sparks. The metal on the huge arm let out a shrill cry, and even the metal arm bent slightly backwards. After all, it was still blocked. Only then did Lothar notice that the huge pile of metal beside the mana pool just now was an unactivated golem. Now, this huge golem with condensed arcane energy, as its body and metal parts as its auxiliary, had become a natural barrier between him and the Demon King Sargeras. Lothar, Lothar, I'm tired of playing with you. A slightly better existence among ants like you is not worthy of my personal attack. You are only worthy of fighting with the toys I created. You Anduin Lothar, just like that little guy Duque, go to hell. Mediva's face showed the greatest evil aura. Every contorted facial curve on his face was condensed with malevolence and disgust. Mediva's whole body began to transform. Two long, flaming horns protruded from his head. His delicate and elegant face became withered, and three awl-like spikes protruded from his chin. His exposed skin had also become dry, like the bark of a dead tree. But between the dry and cracked skin, a huge green light could be clearly seen flowing in this body that could once accommodate the power of all the guardians of the Tirisful Council. Lothar wanted to curse Sargeras, but he could not breathe under the pressure of this huge arcane golem's crazy attack. The golem's fist was too big and too fast. With Lothar's speed, dodging was completely an extravagant hope. When the heavy fist that was enough to split a mountain and split a stone hit, although Lothar had tilted his shield in an attempt to deflect the thunderous force, Lothar obviously failed. It was difficult to use an epic-level shield in this kind of battle. The rare shield branded with the lion emblem of Stormwind City turned into powder in just 1/10 of a second. The only thing that could protect Lothar was the king's sword. Parrying with his sword horizontally was a standard military sword technique. It was the only way out. The king's sword, which had suffered a heavy blow, showed unimaginable toughness. Even if it bent backward as much as possible, even if it had clearly revealed an arc, the king's sword still did not break. If it were another warrior, they might have been crushed by the huge force of this huge golem and killed on the spot. Lothar was Lothar. In a split second, he could still quickly adjust the pace of his legs and shift his center of gravity. Before the surging force that mortals could match destroyed his body, he dodged to the left, and his center of gravity moved to the side. The golem's huge fist suddenly missed. Even the ground that had been reinforced by special magic couldn't withstand such a violent heavy blow. With a bang, stone chips flew everywhere. If Lothar hadn't insisted on wearing a suit of armor, perhaps he would have been turned into a bloody sieve by the sharp and high-speed stones, because he couldn't dodge in time. The punch missed, but Lothar's crisis was not over. The huge golem's fierce attack continued without any pause. The giant fist that should have been inserted into the ground suddenly swung horizontally, almost blasting half of Lothar's body into meat paste. Lothar couldn't even deal with a golem, let alone Sargeras, who was watching a beast fight next to him. For the first time, despair gripped Lothar's heart tightly. At this time, there was a loud noise outside Karazhan Tower. It was a super strong attack that even Karazhan, which was in an independent space, felt a strong shock. Chapter 127. Just a few minutes ago, the sky outside of Karazhan had completely changed. Dark clouds covered the horizon, like a storm that was about to sweep over. However, this storm was not a dead thing from nature. Every molecule that made up the storm was a dragon that mortals would rarely see in their lifetime. The huge wings flapped powerfully, and every time the wings flapped, it seemed to make the whole sky tremble. The dragons let out a low roar inadvertently as they breathed. There were all kinds of auras such as flames, and the faint sound of wind and thunder, making their power even more extraordinary. Most of the dragons were red, mixed with a very small amount of green and bronze. They raised their speed to the maximum, and this was completely the rhythm of swooping down to wash the ground with dragon breath. On a mountain peak not far from Karazhan, a woman with gorgeous red horns strode forward. With her firm steps, the long red hair behind her head fluttered in the wind. Wrapped in a red bikini armor with golden edges, her exposed skin had the healthiest wheat-colored skin. She walked proudly towards a mysterious man in a long robe standing at the top of the mountain. Yo, Egwene, are you sure your plan will really work? All the dragons that can be summoned on planet Azeroth are basically here. I don't want the dragon bloodline to go extinct. The matter of the blue dragon and black dragon is enough to make my heart ache. That mysterious person was the previous guardian of Azeroth, Egwene, the mother of Medivh. She gently pulled down her hood, revealing a beautiful face that didn't look old at all. Old friend, we have guarded this world together for hundreds of years. I think we have the same attitude towards demons, don't we? Alexstrasza. If Duque were here, he would definitely exclaim that history was completely unreliable. Egwene, who should have been severely injured by Sargeras, held back because she received the warning signal in advance. She was defeated, but she wasn't seriously injured like in history, and could only hide to recuperate. It was just a minor injury, so she had the strength to gather a group of old friends to deal with Sargeras together. 10,000 years ago, it was the combined power of the 5 dragon aspects that created the dragon soul, to teach the invading demons how to be human. 10,000 years later, the Black Dragon King Nesario had betrayed the Blue Dragons, the Emerald Dream of the Green Dragons had been corroded, and the Bronze Dragon King, Nozdormu, had disappeared. The Red Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, the only one who could move, still stood up and called for all the dragons to participate in the siege against Karazhan. Faced with Egwene's answer, the Red Dragon Queen raised a new question. Yes, we can't let Sargeras do whatever he wants. But if Sargeras really has complete control over Medivh's soul, and all of Karazhan's power, we'll only die if we attack. Egwene smiled at the Red Dragon Queen's worry. I had the same worry as you. However, it seemed that we had received unexpected reinforcements. A little fellow had used special means to disrupt Sargeras' senses and communications. He gave me the opportunity to control part of Karazhan's defenses. Part? That's right. The most important anti-air firepower won't be activated. Alright, you've convinced me for now. If the Red Dragon race falls this time, I'll tear you apart first, Egwene. With that, the Red Dragon Queen left without looking back. Alas, Alexstrasza, your temper is still so hot. As the Red Dragon Queen left, a beautiful and elegant female figure slowly appeared not far from Egwene. Sky-blue shoulder-length hair, long ears, a moon-white robe, and a dignified and calm temperament. Everything about this mysterious night elf was extraordinary. A huge white tiger accompanied this beautiful night elf dressed like a priestess. Shadow evasion, one of the night elf's signature racial talent skills. This priestess was so powerful that she could even fool the Red Dragon Queen. No, it might not necessarily be fooled. Perhaps Alexstrasza had found out, but didn't bother to point it out. Dragons were powerful and proud. There were many things that dragons would not cooperate with other races, unless they had no other choice. So the dragons and Egwene were one thing, and Egwene finding other helpers was another. Egwene sighed again. Thank you for your help. The priestess standing beside the white tiger smiled lightly, revealing a beautiful smile that even the stars paled in comparison. I'm just helping as an individual. It has nothing to do with the night elves. Alas, alright, this is at least a beginning. The priestess interrupted Egwene's topic. There is no beginning, and there is no end. Do you want me to repeat myself? No need. Get to work. As the priestess chanted, a mysterious power began to communicate with the entire world. The sky that had been bright a moment ago suddenly darkened. The clouds disappeared. The sun disappeared. What appeared in the sky above Karazhan was a bright starry sky. In the beautiful starry sky, in a constellation that was about to be destroyed and burned out, a huge star broke into pieces, disintegrating into countless rays of light that scattered in the dark sky. However, under the guidance of Elun's divine power, dozens of huge star fragments began to approach planet Azeroth at high speed. The blazing light cut through the sky, brutally tore through the atmosphere, and fell straight towards Karazhan. The fall of the stars was under control. Under the control of unimaginable power of mortals, The huge meteorite fragment crashed into Karazhan's magic shield with a ferocious power that could destroy the world. The powerful magic shield that could withstand the siege of tens of thousands of mortal warriors, for several months, failed in less than a tenth of a second under this earth-shattering blow. The shield was easily broken like a soap bubble. The trajectory of the slanted fall, the strong wind pressure, and the ear-piercing whistling sound all announced the arrival of destruction to the master of Karazhan. "Bastard, who is it?" It was only then that Sargeras reacted as if he had just woken up from a dream, and there was an angry roar in the mage tower. Unfortunately, it was too late. The first falling meteorite fragment was the size of a carriage. Under the acceleration of gravity, the perfect combination of speed and gravity, was the entire highly enchanted main gate of Karazhan, which even siege owls could not shake at all, along with the two-story building, collapsed into powder in an instant. The second meteorite fragment fell, and the secondary tower that guarded the main tower of Karazhan was like a sandcastle that had been washed away by the waves. It collapsed into powder in an instant, and dissipated with the wind in the direction that the meteorite had come from. The third, fourth, more than a dozen meteorite fragments fell with a loud bang. Even someone as powerful as Sargeras could not help but be flustered under this kind of attack. This was the signature move of a famous priestess, falling stars. Chapter 128. Duque died. Once again, after a few months, he had almost forgotten the smell of death. There were some things that he could never get used to, such as dying again and again. In the game, when the team was wiped out while exploring the boss, running to the corpse again and again was not a problem at all. In this real Azeroth, the punishment of death was more terrifying than Duque had imagined. Duque's soul was not in the graveyard near Karazhan, nor did he have the option to give up healing and resurrect in the graveyard. His soul had always been next to his corpse, surrounded by a lifeless scene. The scene of death, which he had once been very uncomfortable with, extended to the end of his vision. In the black and white world in front of him, there were dark gray, almost black clouds floating everywhere. They seemed to be pulled by some invisible force on Sargeras' body. They slowly rotated around Sargeras like a whirlpool, like a slowly rotating tornado. Just as he had feared, when he encountered a superior demon, his soul was very easily corrupted and eroded. Now, it was bound by the evil power of the Demon King. System notification. You have been killed by the Demon King Sargeras. Due to the image of highly concentrated demon power, your soul power is only left with 70%, and your humanity is 60%. Warning. You are now within the range of Sargeras' soul corruption. You will lose 1 soul power and 1% of your humanity every 5 minutes. You cannot leave the 100-meter radius of Sargeras in your soul state. Fortunately, Duque still saw the option to pick up the corpse and resurrect, and Sargeras didn't seem to notice his special soul. He didn't dare to resurrect. If he resurrected casually, he would be easily killed again, and it would make Sargeras even more vigilant. He couldn't drag it out for too long. Otherwise, he could only join the Burning Legion and become a demon. Duque could wait, but he wouldn't sit still and wait for death. When he couldn't hold on any longer, he would naturally give it his all. However, Duque in his soul state wouldn't just sit around and do nothing. He had done something that most mortals couldn't imagine. He had hacked into Karazhan's defense system. This wasn't just his own effort. The greater credit was due to the system elf, and a certain special existence. There was no doubt that the system elf was powerful. In the world with computers before his transmigration, most of the complicated and relatively simple tasks were handled by computers. Not so in Azeroth. If there was no magic, this would still be a world where the officers on the battlefield could only shout orders. And if they were too far away, they could only release signal flares, or have the cavalry act as messengers. Even if there were spells, magic arrays, and other defense systems, they were still mostly simple information feedback. For example, If someone triggered a certain alarm system in Karazhan, even the most sophisticated sensor could only barely sense the strength of the other party, the number of people, and other basic information. In order to carefully assess the enemy's strength, the mage himself had to use Mage's Eye and other observation methods to confirm it with his own eyes. If the owner of Karazhan was still Medivh, Duque might not have been able to do anything. But Sargeras was another matter altogether. Previously, in order to confuse others, Karazhan's entire magic defense system was set up in the style of humans. Basically, Sargeras wasn't easy to use. After Sargeras completely controlled Medivh, he didn't have the time to change the entire mage tower to the system that demons were used to, because Sargeras was busy plotting against the 6 members of the Tirisful Council. Sargeras didn't think it would be useful, so he left a big gap for Duque. Moreover, Duque had a helper, the soul of Medivh's biological father Alan. On the night that Medivh came of age, he was awakened by a nightmare. The huge energy in his body began to explode, crossing the astral plane, and alarming the priests of the Northshire Abbey. They rushed to the storm stronghold at top speed, and Alan and hundreds of priests worked together to suppress the explosion of energy. A few days later, the energy suddenly disappeared. Medivh fell into a deep sleep, and his father, Nielos Alan, fell to the ground and died from exhaustion. But no one knew that Alan's soul hadn't completely dissipated. In history, when Medivh was killed by Khadgar, Alan's soul, who was bound in Karazhan, was eroded by evil power, and became a boss called Shadow of Alan. Previously, after Duque dealt with the evil hoof, he went to visit Alan's soul. At this moment Alan was still rational. After learning that his favorite child Medivh had been eroded by Sargeras, Alan decided to help. Few people knew that Medivh's achievements were not only because of his mother Egwene's extremely powerful bloodline and the inheritance of the Guardian's power, but also because of the teachings of Nielos Alan, the former court mage of Stormwind. So when Medivh built Karazhan later, he used Alan's knowledge and design concepts. With the system elf working, and Medivh's father as a traitor, it would be strange if Duque didn't stir up trouble. After the system elf completely analyzed this defense system, Duque wasn't just adding water to milk. He was simply mixing milk into water to fool Sargeras. In the air outside Karazhan, it seemed like a tragic massacre had just begun. In the air near Karazhan, which seemed to be just an ordinary building, countless complicated and precise magic circles suddenly flashed. Different colors represented the different elemental realms that the magic circles connected to. With the support of the huge magic pool, these magic circles were able to open the openings to the elemental realms to the limit. Along with the dazzling magical radiance, huge blazing fireballs, long icy arrows, and cyclones that could easily cut through steel poured out in the direction where the dragons were coming from. 100, 1,000. No, it was a magic storm formed by tens of thousands of magic circles that surrounded the entire Karazhan. This magic storm easily engulfed the dragons thousands of meters away. Egwene, the largest red dragon among the dragons, roared angrily in Egwene's direction. Seeing this, the Red Dragon Queen's first reaction was that she had been tricked. Dragons had quite good magic resistance, but it was only good. They couldn't achieve the legendary complete immunity to magic. With such a huge amount of high-level magic pouring down, it was obvious that the dragons would be greatly weakened after this battle, even if they didn't go extinct. No wonder Alexstrasza was mad. She could almost imagine that in an instant her children, her people, would be pierced through by powerful magic, or directly through their bodies. They would scream in despair and fall from the sky, sprinkling a noble rain of blood. However, after the storm-like attack, it seemed that not a single falling dragon was seen. What the hell? Chapter 129. In a few breaths' time, other than the barrage created by the conventional low-damage magic seals, all the large magic seals shone brightly again. It's coming. Be careful to dodge. Alexstrasza shouted. Dragons were strong, but their strongest point was not their long-range attacks. Draconic magic could rarely kill enemies hundreds of meters away. Dragon breath only had a short range of a few dozen meters. The strongest point of the dragon race was naturally their unparalleled melee combat. In close combat, the dragon race rarely had a match. Speaking of which, even with the support and cover of Goddess Elun's chosen, this distance of nearly 1,000 meters was still a space of death for the dragon race. However, when the huge magic seal at the top of Karazhan, which had a diameter of more than 50 meters, let out a deafening roar, the magic cannon that symbolized Karazhan's fiercest attack was sent flying. Looking at the cannon that brushed past the top of the group of dragons, ready to use arcane energy to conquer the Sea of Stars, the Red Dragon Queen knew that Egwene's words about a traitor were true. Beams of different colored light stabbed into the group of dragons like forks, but they did not even take off a few dragon hairs, let alone dragon scales. So scary, this kind of attack. It only looks scary. The group of dragons maintained their high-speed charge while whispering. Not only the guys below, but the Red Dragon Queen was also muttering. Koristrash, what do you think? The red dragon called Koristrash might be a little unfamiliar to everyone, but in the future, his human form would be more commonly known as Krasis. The current Krasis was just a dragon follower. Koristrash stared at the gorgeous but useless magic barrage for a full 3 seconds. A genius is controlling Karazhan's magic defense system. If it's not some special magic puppet, then this guy's strength must be very shocking. At this moment, Egwene touched a sore spot. A mage spoke to her through telepathy. Alexstrasza, what did you say just now? Nothing. My throat is itchy, so I roared to call you. The Red Dragon Queen blushed. Well, her face was already red, so it was impossible to tell. Under Duque's secret control, Karazhan's defense system became the most gorgeous fireworks system. The fiercest and most powerful firepower would definitely be fired in a direction that absolutely could not be hit. Only the small magic arrays that couldn't hurt the dragons would be more serious about bombarding the dragons. The Red Dragon Queen felt like she had been tricked, not to mention everything else. I really don't know if that guy did it on purpose or not. As the leader of the Red Dragons, it was only natural that he would receive the strongest firepower. Moreover, the Red Dragon Queen's body was the largest and the easiest to hit. Unfortunately, that bastard had been flirting with Alexstrasza all along. Dozens of arcing, delayed explosions, and direct attacks had forced the Red Dragon Queen to change her flight path 7 times in just 3 seconds. However, she was still easily forced into a dead end. However, when she was about to activate the magic defense circle and take a heavy blow, the opponent threw a harmless low-density arcane bomb. It was like a paint bullet in an air combat simulation. Let me tell you, I can really shoot you down, but it's just a fake fight. The Red Dragon Queen felt terrible after being slapped in the face. A distance of 1,000 meters was nothing for the dragons. If it wasn't for the fact that they were being careful and kept everyone flying irregularly, they would really be there in a short while. Obviously, they had worried too much. In general, apart from the Red Dragon Queen 99% of the dragons had successfully passed through what was supposed to be a dead space. No matter how stupid Sargeras was, he realized that he had been played. The magic defense system of this era usually used some fixed shooting routes to form a barrage, and then cooperated with magic apprentices or controllers to further divide the air defense zone. However, Sargeras neglected one thing. He didn't have lower-level officers or magic apprentices to help him deal with the defense system independently. He had wanted to use demons, but the entire Mage Tower had been designed according to human standards. For example, the control rooms couldn't be entered by larger demons. This became a flaw. Bastard. Who did this? Although he cursed, Sargeras certainly couldn't let these big lizards charge into Karazhan unscrupulously. Karazhan had the pool of magic that supported the entire dark portal. If these big lizards really charged in and destroyed the pool of magic, his plan to corrupt the world of Azeroth through the dark portal and further open the space barrier would completely fail. Kill them. With Sargeras's roar, The vertical pupils of the dragons reflected the vortex-like portals in the air around Karazhan. They could even see that on the other side of the purple vortex full of chaos and evil, there was a world that had become desolate and dead because of complete destruction. The scorched earth that had been burned to the point where there was no longer a trace of life, left by the hellfire, filled every corner of the other side of the portal in their field of vision. Now, stepping on that dead land, huge demons with long horns and huge bat wings rushed out through the portal at high speed. However, the dragons were moving faster than the demons had imagined. In the blink of an eye, the dragons had already rapidly expanded in the demons' field of vision. From a small black dot on the horizon to every scale on their ferocious dragon heads, it was really only a matter of a few blinks of an eye. It was like a replica of the battle between the 5-colored dragons and the Burning Legion 10,000 years ago. The earth-shattering roar resounded through the earth again, but it was obviously different from that time. For the first time, the demon army was at a disadvantage. A large number of demons didn't have time to pass through the portal before they were blocked by the dragon's breath. They couldn't use their advantage in numbers at all. A large number of burly half-dragons that were as tall as 3 people jumped down from the backs of the dragons, waving double-headed blades that were more than 10 meters long, and cutting the bodies of the demons. Sargeras almost went crazy with anger when he saw the image transmitted through the mirror. It was the first time he had fought so hard. On the mountain peak next to him, Egwene pursed her lips. Not enough, not enough. What's wrong? Asked the Night Elf priestess, who was still casting Starfall. Sargeras used the energy of the magic pool in Karazhan to forcibly open a temporary portal and teleport some of the Burning Legion demons over. But if they continue fighting like this, there will be no end to it. Before Karazhan's magic is exhausted, the losses of the dragons will continue to increase. The problem is that Karazhan's magic is enough for Sargeras to last for a long time. Is there any way? There's nothing we can do on our side. Unless... Chapter 130. Unless... The priestess raised her head proudly, and the light of divinity flowed in her eyes. Unless the group of people who raided Karazhan can deal a fatal blow to the Demon King, while we're holding back most of Sargeras' forces. Can they do it? The Night Elves expressed their doubts. The one inside is a descendant of Thoradin. Thoradin the Great was a name that even the most ignorant Night Elves had heard of. Even though the Night Elves didn't have much contact with the humans, it didn't stop them from knowing that there was a hero on another continent who chased away the trolls, united the various human tribes, and built a great empire. Hearing this name, the priestess was in awe. If Anduin Lothar really did it, then he'll be the hero of the entire world of Azeroth. Egwene's voice lowered. What was Lothar, whom Egwene had high hopes for, doing? Sorry, this great hero was running away in a sorry state. Lothar was very tired. He could hear his extremely heavy breathing. The sound of blowing bellows announced that his physical strength had dropped to a very low level. His lungs, which felt like they were not enough no matter how much oxygen he inhaled, could no longer squeeze out more of his physical strength. He took off his helmet, and after the shoulder strap of his armor was accidentally broken, he had to take the opportunity to remove and throw away the armor. He only had time to throw away the well-bound gauntlets and leggings. It couldn't be helped. In front of the golem whose power was beyond human imagination, the word power was meaningless. The only way to save his life was to dodge flexibly between the 12 pillars surrounding the workshop. Lothar rolled and crawled to dodge the attacks of the giant golem again and again. Gradually, his physical strength and luck seemed to have reached the end. Lothar glanced at his old friend Medivh, the guy who should be called Sargeras now. An evil red light glowed in the eyes that were sunken into the sockets. Its white teeth seemed to be ready to devour people at any time. Its withered body that did not have a trace of life aura was even more frightening. Sargeras ignored Lothar and muttered a series of demon incantations that Lothar did not understand. He didn't know if this was the incantation to maintain the door of darkness or something else. Looking at Garona, who was still twitching on the ground, and Duque's corpse, whose blood had gradually turned cold. Lothar's will to resist did not weaken at all, but despair had unknowingly gripped Lothar's heart. In front of the leader of the Burning Legion, Sargeras, the little power of humans was too insignificant. They couldn't even be considered a mantis trying to stop a chariot. Even if Lothar guessed that Sargeras had been pinned down, what else could he do? He couldn't even escape the giant golem's pursuit. The enormous lightning balls that the golem threw out were glittering with blue and white electric arcs, emitting ear-splitting noises that stimulated Lothar's nerves non-stop and threatened him. If he dared to cross the line, Lothar's only outcome would be to be burnt. Lothar took advantage of an opening and used all his strength to rush over. He failed. The huge golem was more agile than he had imagined. A huge fist blasted over, and Lothar had no choice but to roll awkwardly to avoid this blow. The fist blasted less than a meter away from Lothar, which happened to be a huge pillar. The destructive shock spread to the ceiling above Sargeras's head, and a huge black line of twisting cracks immediately appeared on the wall. The black line was spreading at high speed, and after a while, a small part of the entire workshop collapsed. Crash! Rubble fell all over the ground, and unknowingly, it covered Duque's corpse. Lothar had no time to care, because another heavy punch from the golem had already arrived. It's over. Even before the fist arrived, Lothar knew that he couldn't dodge it this time. Not only was his stamina almost exhausted, but a piece of rubble had also hit his ankle just now, and a piercing pain suddenly came. Perhaps he would be fine after resting for a while, but the problem was that the inhumane golem would not give its enemies time to rest. Bam! With a loud bang, Lothar was swept away by the golem's giant fist. At this moment, Lothar only felt that his internal organs had shifted positions. Death was right in front of him. Lothar was very tired. He was physically and mentally exhausted, and he couldn't even stand up. As a swordsman, he should never abandon his sword, but it had already been knocked away by the bombardment just now. After spinning a few times, the king's sword lay quietly behind Mediv. Sargeras's face was full of mockery. He didn't stop chanting, and used a voice that came from his soul to talk to Lothar. Hee. Lothar. Lothar, you've finally reached the end of your life. Why, do you have any thoughts? Lothar should have truly and completely lost all hope. But at this moment, a strange figure appeared on the back of the huge golem. It was a shadow that was close to a soul, but Lothar dared to swear that the ghost was definitely Duque. There was no way he would mistake the face that had filled his mind since the beginning. He also clearly saw the soul-like Duque give him a hand gesture. That was what he had taught Duque before entering Karazhan. It meant I need cover. Cover? What cover? Well, the only thing he could do was to taunt. Lothar sat up in a very pretentious manner and combed his hair with his left hand. Sorry, it's not time for me to sum up my life yet, because I have a shocking secret about the world of Azeroth. At this point, Lothar's voice trailed off. Huh. Sargeras's interest was piqued. He had seen many people who betrayed their masters for glory. The so-called heroes were definitely one in a million who persisted to the end. He wasn't afraid that Lothar would lie to him. In Sargeras's opinion, Lothar wouldn't benefit from lying to him. Moreover, Lothar was a descendant of the human Thoradin the Great. Maybe he really had some secrets. Sargeras approached Lothar as he chanted. Beside Lothar, the huge golem raised its fist high, ready to smash Lothar into minced meat at any time. It was only waiting for Sargeras's command. Standing in front of Lothar, Sargeras raised his chin arrogantly and looked down at Lothar, who was walking on the ground. You can speak now. Of course, the consequences of angering me are worse than death. You have to know one thing. Mortals are not finished at all in front of my power. Well, my secret is. At this point, Lothar's voice became weaker and weaker. In the second half of the sentence, Lothar's voice suddenly became louder. It was like a lion's roar. King Devil Dash. Chapter 131. After shouting, Noxus really didn't have any strength left. Ever since he saw that Duque, who he didn't know if it was an illusion, appeared again and gestured to him that he was done, he went all out. Sure enough, as soon as he finished speaking, a middle-aged ghost in a stormwind court mage robe suddenly appeared on his left. Without saying a word, he directly shot an ice arrow at Sargeras. Sargeras was also stunned. Who is he? But in the next moment, the memory from Medivh told Sargeras who this strange ghost mage was. Nielos Alan. Medivh's biological father. This is really a ghost. Why is Alan's soul here? Why does he have the ability to release magic? A series of questions further disturbed Sargeras' attention. Of course, this was not fatal. Almost subconsciously, Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, instantly opened a magic shield. In the face of the highest level of magic, low concentration of magic was nothing at all. Alan's attack could only surprise Sargeras for a while. However, no one would have thought that the mastermind of all this was Duque. Knowing that Sargeras was so difficult to deal with, would Duque only arrange one killer move? Without any reason, the golem's lightning-covered fist came crashing down. The moment the golem moved, Sargeras didn't react. Because in his mind, the golem was automatically protecting its master. He didn't think the golem's attack could cause any real damage to Alan. But after figuring out that Alan was actually a spirit, Sargeras had more means to deal with this Medivh's biological father. The eyes of Medivh, who was controlled by Sargeras, suddenly flashed. It was a frightening light, because Sargeras was shocked to find that the golem's fist actually changed direction in the air and blasted straight at his head. What the hell? Sargeras had to make a second reaction in such a short time. He even interrupted Medivh's incantation and summoned two huge flaming arms at the cost of magic backlash. It was a pair of huge flaming arms the size of a carriage. The flaming arms, half real and half illusory, burst out from Sargeras' left and right sides. The hands crossed their fingers and caught the golem's heavy punch, which was originally enough to smash Medivh's body into minced meat. Phew! Sargeras was also shocked. The moment the crisis was over, he couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. At the same time, he thought to himself, what's wrong with this garbage golem? I must tear it down when I have time. Just then, an unprecedented sense of danger spread through Sargeras' consciousness. Behind him, the Demon King was indeed the Demon King. He had clearly suffered a series of attacks, and he was already too busy. Even at this time, he still had a reaction. He almost subconsciously prepared to use the mage's signature skill, Flash, which could instantly transform his body into arcane energy and teleport him more than 10 meters away. The fact that he was forced to use Flash proved that he was in a sorry state. Sargeras had always been disdainful of the mage's ordinary magic. But Sargeras had no choice. His body now belonged to Medivh. The mage's frail body couldn't take a beating at all. If Medivh's body was destroyed, he would also be in big trouble. Sargeras almost forced himself to recite the incantation. However, after 1/100th of a second, the incantation didn't start. A soul power from his body stopped him and wantonly fought with him for control of the body. Medivh? It was actually Medivh's soul. At this most critical moment, Medivh's remnant soul actually ran out and ruined things. A terrible feeling of foreboding filled Sargeras' heart. The appearance of Medivh not only interfered with all his spellcasting, but also made his whole body stiff. The next moment, a scorching pain suddenly spread in Sargeras' chest. What? Sargeras' neck was like a rusty machine. With great difficulty, he lowered his head and looked at his chest. There, a blade that emitted a dazzling golden light pierced through the center of Medivh's chest. It was stained with human blood that contained the energy of the fallen titan. An incomparably strong holy aura was spreading through Medivh's body at an unimaginable speed. No! Sargeras let out an earth-shattering roar. His magical voice even made the entire Karazhan and the surrounding areas tremble. Around Karazhan, the battlefield that had been fiercely fighting fell silent. The demons that were fighting raised their heads in shock, and cold air flowed between their sharp teeth. The dragon let go of the demon's mouth and raised its head. The half-dragon, who was being suppressed, also raised its head and looked at the highest level of Karazhan. The Red Dragon Queen, Egwene, and the Night Elf Priestess also had clear ecstasy in their eyes. Everyone could tell that Sargeras had been hit. This heart-wrenching sound was accompanied by the rapid weakening of the magic transmission from the various portals on the battlefield, as well as the disappearance of the magic light on the Karazhan Mage Tower, which hadn't weakened since the beginning of the battle. Everyone realized that Sargeras was done for. Although they didn't know who did it, it was obvious that a certain existence had given Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, a fatal blow. Lothar's pupils suddenly shrank. He couldn't believe his eyes. Duque, holding the hilt of the sword, the person who appeared behind Medivh was actually Duque. It wasn't Duque's ghost but Duque. Had he seen a ghost? Or was it that he was already a dead man, and his soul was preparing to accompany Duque on his journey? Lothar's heart was in a mess. Originally, Lothar didn't believe that Duque's ghost could do anything. He was just trying to make a desperate attempt. Now Lothar was a dead man, and he was treating him like a living person. Anyway, Duque was on his side, and his situation couldn't get any worse. He would take a gamble. A true hero never lacked courage, and was more willing to give hope to someone he trusted. Lothar had cooperated with Duque purely because of this mentality. Who would have thought that Duque would actually come up with a chain of tricks and kill Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, in one fell swoop? This was simply beyond imagination. Wasn't Duque dead? Time and space seemed to have completely frozen. Duque's face was cold, and he had no intention of relaxing at all. The king's sword, which should only be used by Lothar, the descendant of Thoradin the Great, burst out waves of dazzling brilliance in Duque's hands. This was the power of humans, the will of Thoradin the Great and the other human sages. It represented the will of humans that had been passed down for thousands of years, and the indomitable will to survive on this land. It could be said that, in a sense, this king's sword was a collection of human consciousness. Now at this moment, Duque had used this sword to stab Medivh to death. Chapter 132. There were too many questions in Lothar's mind. Why did Duque, who should have been beheaded, come back to life? Why did it seem like Duque had planned all of this? Why could Duque hide from Sargeras' senses and seize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to kill Sargeras in one fell swoop? A series of questions almost broke Lothar's mind. On the other side, Lothar was also filled with emotions. Victory. He actually won. He had thought that this was a backlash of despair. Even though Lothar had been cheering for the warriors, he had always been prepared to show these demons the backbone of humans, even if he didn't succeed. He didn't expect it to become another important milestone in the history of the war between humans and demons. It didn't matter how much power Sargeras possessed in Madison's body. No matter how many powerful existences helped to restrain Sargeras' power. A kill was a kill. The one who killed the Lord of the Burning Legion, the King of Demons, and the fallen Titan Sargeras for the billions of living beings in Azeroth was Duke Marcus. This was the most profound stroke worthy of being engraved in the history books. Lothar propped himself up and looked at the sword that he was incomparably familiar with, that was blooming with holy golden light. Lothar suddenly recalled that sentence. "Those who fight for humanity will receive my protection." Ancestor Thoradin's whispers still echoed in his ears. Lothar suddenly had a realization. Why could Duque pick up the sword of the king with a will? It was very simple. From the beginning, it wasn't the sword of the king. Thoradin himself wasn't the chosen king. It was purely because an emperor could better unify the scattered human clans that there was Thoradin the Great, and this sword of the king. This sword, which should have been nameless, would only flow with the blood of the enemies of humanity. It only fought for humans, so anyone who held it was destined to bleed only for humans. If one day, the sword-bearer betrayed the ideals inherited from the ancient kings, then the sword-bearer's life would definitely wither. However, the stars of the ancient sages and kings would still rise, and continued to shine upon the Azeroth, protecting the human race for generations to come. Noxus might have many questions, but he suddenly realized that these questions were no longer important. Everyone had their own trump cards and secrets. Duque had picked up the king's sword. This proved that Duque was a hero recognized by all the ancient kings. Gazing at the golden light on the sword, Noxus' eyes blurred. He seemed to have heard an ancient battle song from more than 1,000 years ago, majestic and impassioned. This was the belief passed down by the late Emperor Thoradin to all human descendants. This was a legacy that had transcended thousands of years. This was humanity's will to strive to become stronger in this land full of cruel competition. Looking at Duque's young face, Lothar, who was in his 40s, suddenly felt a little old. Ah, it's good to be young. Wait a minute. Young. It was supposed to be a happy ending of defeating the evil super boss. But Lothar was shocked to see that Duque's face was rapidly growing. No, it was rapidly aging. Almost in the blink of an eye, Duque's face grew from a childish 14-year-old to a 16-year-old, 17 years old, 18 years old. No, this wasn't growing. This should be some kind of extremely vicious curse that Sargeras cast before his death. He was using the last of his strength to counterattack Duque. Just as Duque held the sword with both hands and forcefully stirred and tore Mediva's heart, Sargeras raised his left hand and backhanded Duque with a mysterious black energy pattern. Sargeras's roar before his death proved this point. Duke Marcus, you ant, do you think this is the end? No. I'm immortal. I'm immortal. But you have to pay for hurting me. Sargeras's furious voice reverberated throughout Karazhan, and even the entire Upwind Trail area. At that moment, every human, elf, and giant dragon who participated in the attack on Karazhan heard the name of the hero who killed Sargeras. They were happy for Duque. They were also worried for Duque. That was the counterattack of the King of Demons. Who dared to say that they could withstand it? The horror of demons wasn't just their incomparably strong combat power, but also their strange, terrifying curses that were impossible to guard against. If they were not careful, even a dragon with an incomparably strong body would die tragically. The other dragons could only watch helplessly as their companions died in pain and despair. Not to mention the frail humans. In fact, even Duque himself was regretting it, let alone the others. Damn, why did I have to deal the final blow? Damn it, is Khadgar's tragedy going to happen to me? At that moment, Duque's heart was filled with tears. Before he killed Mediv, who was possessed by Sargeras, Duque had been thinking about how to kill old Max. Now that he was dead, Duque suddenly realized another rather important matter. In history, Khadgar had ambushed and killed Mediv, and he had also been cursed by Sargeras before he died. Khadgar's life force had been sucked away. That was why there was Khadgar, who was clearly young, but had a face full of white hair. While time seemed to have frozen, Duke's mind was filled with hundreds of thousands of curses. I didn't think that Khadgar would die for no reason, and I, who replaced Khadgar as the hero who killed Sargeras, would also be cursed by this disgusting curse. He thought about how he, who had clearly been a young man before and after transmigrating, was actually going to become a little old man. Although a certain someone had said, a real man will always be loved no matter what he turns into. But, whoever wanted to turn into an old man could do it themselves. Don't look for me. Alright, even if in his heart, Duque had already flipped the table in anger no less than 1,000,000 times. In reality, only a blink of an eye had passed. Duque didn't dare to let go at all. He continued to pour his mental strength into the king's sword. As long as Sargeras wasn't completely dead, Duque couldn't relax for even a moment. Otherwise, if he allowed this demon king to catch his breath, all of humanity would be dead. He could only watch as the black ray of aging shone on his face. He could only helplessly let Sargeras's curse suck away his life force. This feeling of his body being hollowed out was terrible. Suddenly, an absolutely unexpected figure used his hand to block the trajectory of the black ray shooting towards Duque. Nielos Aaron, the soul of Mediva's father, had used his soul body to block the attack for Duque. Duque's facial muscles froze. Chapter 133. Just like how he couldn't do anything before, Duque was also powerless at this moment. He didn't know what the curse was about, but Duque only knew that Alan's soul, which was originally extremely condensed and full of magic power to release magic, began to dissipate at this moment. Like gravel blown away by the wind, the white-haired Alan's spirit body was disintegrated into soul molecules in Duque's vision. Such a great mage who was loyal to the stormwind, such a great father, so easily disappeared in the wind. All that was left was a whisper of the soul. "I'm atoning for my child." Duque's eyes suddenly became moist. That's right. He had used Mediva's possession as an excuse to persuade Alan's soul. He didn't expect Alan's father to choose to be completely annihilated in this world, for the sake of atoning for his child. It was precisely Alan's sacrifice that temporarily alleviated Duque's curse. At this moment, another person that Duque couldn't imagine came to the rescue. It was Lothar's hand. Lothar had rushed up at some point and grabbed Mediva's hand tightly. A considerable portion of the evil power that was supposed to pour onto Duque's body was diverted by Lothar. Lothar's temples were turning white at a speed visible to the naked eye. "Bastard! You can all wither together." Sargeras was mad. He struggled fiercely, trying to free his body from the sword's piercing, and at the same time tried to increase the strength of the curse. Suddenly, Sargeras discovered that Mediva's right arm had returned to the shape of a human hand. It was a very strange sight. Mediva's left hand was still as thin as a skeleton, and his entire arm emitted a terrifying evil and filthy aura. Mediva's right hand was a perfect human arm. Although it was pale due to the lack of sunlight, it was still a standard human arm. Most importantly, it was holding Mediva's staff, the legendary divine artifact, Atish, Guardian's legendary staff. Ever since the Tirisful Council began to use the power-gathering method, they would inject the magic power of each council member into the Guardian every year. Thus, there were Guardians, and this artifact staff with a head shaped like a chicken drumstick. Whenever the Guardian was unable to withstand any more power, the council members would pour the excess power into the staff. Through the efforts of countless generations of powerful wizards, and the accumulation of countless years of magic power, Atish rose from an ordinary magic staff, all the way to the level of a divine tool. Sargeras had never underestimated it from the start. In order to avoid Atish's backlash, Sargeras even put no less than 10 demonic seals on Mediva's body, after he completely controlled it, in an attempt to taint and corrode Atish's power, and make it his own. At this moment, as Mediva's soul and will recovered and began to fight with Sargeras for control of the body, coupled with Duque's backstab, which gave Sargeras a deeper sense of crisis, Sargeras accidentally snatched control of the body for Mediv. This was a real fatal blow. "Accept your punishment, Sargeras." Unlike Sargeras's voice that came from the evil soul, this voice was undoubtedly the voice of Noxus's old friend, the kind, benevolent, and generous Mediv. With this roar, the hearts of every living creature within a radius of dozens of miles palpitated inexplicably at the same time. One by one, they raised their heads and looked at the highest point of Karazhan. There, they saw 3 figures that were almost entangled together. Normally, it was impossible to see through the solid outer wall, but the light that bloomed from these 3 figures was so intense that it even penetrated the wall, making it easy for every existence to see their movements. The intense battlefield suddenly fell into silence. In the sky, the sun and the moon were dim. The wind stopped. The clamor on the battlefield also stopped. The entire world seemed to have calmed down, opening up a path for one existence. His name was Mediv. Mediv first closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, all the demonic aura in his pupils had faded, leaving only clarity. But at this moment Sargeras, who had been paying attention to Duque and Noxus, finally noticed something strange. The air was filled with a holy smell that he was both familiar and hated. It was as if he had traveled through time and returned to the Pantheon's holy hall 25,000 years ago, where he was constantly questioned by the Titans. No. Sargeras suddenly realized that his soul was being squeezed out of Mediva's body. The laws in the surrounding space were deviating, and the demonic power was being pushed out. An even more powerful and incisive power was descending. It descended with unparalleled might, dominating everything and eliminating all opposing powers. Of course, this included Sargeraz's power. "This is impossible," Sargeraz exclaimed. At the same time, Duque determined through the system that the one who had the upper hand was Medivh, so he decisively stopped the input of his mental strength and reduced the power of the king's sword. His incomparably astute action earned him a grateful look from Medivh. Even though his chest was still pierced by the long sword, even though Medivh's life force was rapidly draining from his chest, Medivh, who had regained control of his body, was still the guardian Medivh revered by the people. Medivh's body was returning to a human body at lightning speed, and Sargeraz's ugly soul was being forcibly stripped from Medivh's body by the power from Atish. "Fall into the abyss forever." With an ethereal cry from Medivh, the divine magic staff in his hand, Atish, bloomed with a strong light that was as dazzling as the sun. The next moment, the entire staff exploded. It wasn't just Atish. Even the magic pool in the workshop, and the protective shield of the entire Karazhan, all exploded at the same time. The incomparably huge magic explosion caused a terrifying shock wave that instantly destroyed more than half of Headwind Trail. Dragons that weighed dozens of tons were directly sent flying, and the half-dragons and demons that weighed more than a ton were even less than ants. They were blown to some corner. The residences that were originally built on the streets next to Karazhan turned into dust in the blink of an eye. The turbulence filled with high concentration of arcane energy spread further along with the strong wind caused by the shock wave. The few trees in Headwind Trail were all charred black in an instant. The land closest to Karazhan was like a 1,000-layer cake, squeezed layer by the shock wave. With Karazhan as the center, it was squeezed out in all directions. The earthquake caused by this terrifying explosion wasn't just felt in the Twilight Forest. Even a small half of the Elven Forest, which had become an orc-controlled area, could feel the tremors. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.